Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel's Opening Succession to Darkseid. Chapter 61. Nanjo's date with Hill was perfect, and definitely didn't go further. South Boat evening he flew back to New York, he will be practicing it. Time is too fast, and soon New York Hulk time has passed 4 months. During this time, Nanjo also practiced in the room with Omega radiation at home. From time to time, he also visited Dr. Pym's laboratory to communicate his feelings and help Dr. Pym make some progress in his new research project. As for the underground world, as code-named 47, he has nothing to do with Jin. The last time Jin and the man under his hands was fattened in the restaurant was naturally not taken care of by Jin. This powerful underground killer, code-named 47, seems to have completely retired. Many people speculate that it was secretly done by Jin but there are still many people who think that this person is still alive, and even the person who has speculated about the Hulk incident is this code 47. There are different opinions on the matter, but there is still no conclusion. The 4 months of idle time gave Nanjo plenty of time to practice. In the past 4 months, he has successfully reached 9% of Darkseid's succession rate, and he is only one step away from 10%. Nanjo understands that if it reaches 10%, there will be a new Darkseid skill, which can't help but make him a little excited. And now Hela, the goddess of death, who has lived in Nanjo's home, has completely adapted to the life of the people on Earth. She also knew that Odin had temporarily dismissed the thought of her, so she dared to go out in an open manner. Definitely, my face that fascinates thousands of men is also indispensable to be touched up and even molested. Although the strength has been sealed for the most part, Hela still has the strength that the people of this earth can't match. So those who molested Hela ended up miserably. However, she still insisted on the death order Nanjo gave her. No murder is allowed. As a dead woman, Nanjo was also the first person besides Odin to give orders to her. But unexpectedly, Hela actually agreed to Nanjo's request without any resistance. It may also be because if he caused a slaughter on the earth, it may not be necessary for Odin to come in person, and Nanjo could send her back to Asgard. At least, during the past 4 months, Nanjo's life was considered safe and sound. This is also a state of life that Nanjo prefers. And on this day, the 3 children who had already started the new semester returned home with a gloomy face. What's wrong? Hela sat on the sofa, looked at the 3 people in front of her, and asked. Having been in this home for 4 months, Hela has been completely integrated into this home. I was hostile by Wanda and Lorna for a while, but now, this hostility has disappeared. Although the 3 children will not be as close to Hela as Nanjo, but the relationship is still good. There are always people in the school talking about Tony. What Stark Expo is going to be held by Stark? Almost all the class wants to go to it. It's really annoying. When Hela heard this, he also understood the reason for the unhappiness of the 3. She also knew that the 3 children hated Stark, it was Stark's weapon that destroyed their home. Hela also listened to the stories of 3 people in Nanjo science popularization, and also learned about the more important tasks in this world. These characters naturally include Tony Stark. Nanjo naturally heard the words of the 3 children and walked out of the kitchen. He looked at the date and it seemed that it was indeed time. Stark will host the Stark Expo in Flushing, New York. Some time before this incident, Stark also called Nanjo. This expo, in order to make various inventions stand out, has been prepared since Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, was alive. But unfortunately, because of Howard's death, this expo was forced to stop. Now Stark has reopened the proposal that has been in dust for nearly 30 years. In fact, the main reason is to show his technological prowess. Definitely, Stark didn't call him to invite him to this place. S.H.I.E.L.D. is still investigating the identity of Darkseid, so if Nanjo went to that place with a mask, he would undoubtedly be caught by S.H.I.E.L.D. And if I were not at home that day, the 3 children would definitely think that they had gone to the fair. The injury to the 3 children at that time is quite terrifying. This Stark is crazy. Hela drove the 3 children back into the room and spoke. It's okay. It's really arrogant and crazy in front of outsiders, but in terms of his achievements on Earth, he does have this qualification. Nanjo also sat back on the sofa. Stark, as the world's most famous superhero, Iron Man, has a technological level that is 10 or even 20 years ahead of the world. Although he is no longer in the weapons manufacturing industry, because of Iron Man's identity, the market value of Stark Industries still allows him to maintain the throne of the world's richest man. It's hard for such a person to be crazy or not. But although he is crazy, he is still good. Nanjo doesn't hate Stark. Although this person is arrogant, he is still very friendly to his acquaintances. Nanjo is willing to make friends with such a person. The clothes you put in the garage were made by him, right? Hila asked again this time. Nanjo nodded. I commissioned him to do it. Hila is spreading his hands. In my opinion, it's pretty ugly, but that person doesn't look very good. As soon as these words came out, Nanjo's face looked a little ugly. The clothes are made according to the design drawings I gave. As soon as Nanjo said this, the embarrassing person became Hila. Just watch Hila smile awkwardly. When you say that, I still think this dress is also a little good looking. The degree of Hela's face change left Nanjo speechless for a while. This is the famous goddess of death. Nanjo definitely doesn't care about Hila, as long as he feels good looking. Anyway, he himself is very satisfied with this dress. That's the problem, it's very inconvenient to carry. So I can only pray that Stark will quickly develop new technologies to solve this problem. Or Dr. Pym can tell himself the plan of the Pym particle, and then he can not only shrink his room, but also shrink his battle suit. Nanjo and Hila are chatting, but Stark is not easy. The expo is about to be held, and interviews by reporters from all walks of life are also rushing. Although he has rejected a lot, reporters still come in an endless stream. This gave Stark a headache. Since admitting that he is Iron Man, every public trip of Stark will attract countless people. This kind of celebrity effect makes Stark very difficult. Mr. Stark, for the country's question of nationalizing your armor. Countless reporters, soldiers, and Stark were in this room at the hearing of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Strengthening Battle Suit Project. Definitely, this also includes Nanjo, and Black Widow Natasha Romanoff. This is already the second day of the Stark Expo. In fact, the Stark Expo was very successful. Stark has already demonstrated his technological prowess in the Screaming Steel battle suit, but likewise, he has also received a subpoena to be told that he must attend the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. This is something Stark cannot refuse. Although he is famous and possesses technology that the whole world cannot master, he is not willing to confront the military. So he flew to Washington overnight and was forced to attend this hearing. In a corner of the hearing, Nanjo and Natasha Romanoff were sitting there, watching the questioning of Stark and Stark's counterattack at the hearing. Very annoying. Nanjo frowned. Obviously he didn't want to come here. But he hasn't worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. for more than half a year. Although there is no need for him to go to the front line to kill HYDRA's mission, Nick will not continue to let Nanjo eat idle food like this. So he was sent here by Nick. The task is to accompany Natasha Romanoff to the hearing. Natasha Romanoff had been investigating the Darkseid incident before, and this time she had a second mission. The first task is naturally to investigate Darkseid, and the second task is to approach Stark and monitor Stark. There is definitely no conflict between the second task and the first task. And when you monitor Stark, you can better investigate the affairs of Darkseid. After all, the only information they could have now was that Darkseid had contact with Stark. Obviously, Natasha Romanoff's current mental state is not very good. The affairs of Darkseid made her very tired. In addition to finding information, she also had to investigate on the spot. Originally, all of this was a lot of hair loss, but I did not expect that there will be a second task now, which is to monitor Stark based on the investigation. How can this not make Natasha Romanoff head big? So she didn't pay much attention to this hearing. Anyway, in the end she will join Stark Industry and become Stark's assistant. You big idler, are you annoying? Natasha Romanoff naturally heard Nanjo's complaint and couldn't help but speak. I really envy you now. I can be like a big idler for nearly half a year. Look at me, I have been busy recently. Natasha Romanoff has a good relationship with Nanjo. In the face of Nanjo, who is younger than himself, Natasha Romanoff has always treated him as a younger brother. Some worries are only talked to Hawkeye Barton and Nanjo. However, Nanjo's idleness must be able to make Natasha Romanoff very unhappy. After all, This holiday is half a year, and the salary is still paid, so it's cool to put it on anyone. So I can't blame Natasha Romanoff for complaining. After all, Nanjo's treatment is really outraged by some people. Isn't this a useful place for me? And now Hydra's organization is not so arrogant. Nanjo would rather find excuses. However, as Nanjo said, Hydra has really stopped a lot recently. It may also be because of Nanjo that Hydra is afraid of this death knell. He is really like a death knell. The mission success rate is as high as 100%, even Natasha Romanoff and Barton can't do it. As long as they are watched by Nanjo, the death bell will ring, and their lives will eventually be taken by Nanjo. After hearing Nanjo's words, Natasha Romanoff sighed more familiarly. Compared to such tasks, she still prefers to go to the front to kill the enemy. The thought of having contact with the dandy Stark made me feel resisted. I'm afraid I want to make Stark believe in me, but I don't know how many times he will betray his hue again. At this time, Stark had already started quarreling with members of Congress. I created a very tough shield for the people. With my existence, how many enemies will be harmful to us, and how many lunatics who only want to fight for the world. I not only protected this place, but also the whole world. Now you say you want to take away my property. Who on earth are the two of us talking assholes? I am Iron Man is me, no one can take me away. Stark's attitude is very tough, definitely, he has always been like this. Members of Congress naturally knew that it was definitely not an easy task to get Stark to accept the plant, so they found Justin Hammer, a person who was regarded as a competitor of Stark Industries. In Stark's eyes, he definitely didn't show up at all. Compared to Stark, I actually don't like this person even more. Watching Hammer undecided on stage, Natasha Romanoff spoke out his thoughts again. Although Stark is arrogant, at least he is still a gentleman. In comparison, this Justin Hammer is an out-and-out hypocrite. Such a person's shield has naturally been investigated, so the hypocrite said that Roar was installed by shield. Nanjo also nodded his head to express affirmation. He also didn't like this Han Mo. Not only a hypocrite, but also a fool. Such people are so-called bad and stupid. It's even more annoying to think that my resume has to include work experience at Hammer Industries. Natasha Romanoff naturally knew that he had handed the job resume to Stark Industries, which also had a record of working at Hammer Industries. By the time Stark's surveillance job is over, you have to feel that the Stark Industry experience on your resume will make you sick. Nanjo's words naturally greeted Natasha Romanoff's eyes. He even reached out and pinched Nanjo's arm to express his dissatisfaction. At the moment Hammer's words are over, and it is Rhodes who will play next. Seeing that Rodriguez was also questioning members of Congress during the hearing, Nanjo slowly came to nature. The hearing is now getting louder and louder, and the volume of both parties is getting louder and louder. This hearing has become a farce. A farce in favor of Stark. When Stark blacked out the electronic screen of the hearing, and played a video of Hammer's mecha experiment. The scenes of the failures and deaths in the video turned the whole situation around in an instant. This farce is not only beneficial to Stark, it even has an uplifting effect on Stark. Not only did the military's idea of conscripting the Stark steel battle suit completely vanish, it also made Stark fire once again. His technology is still unique on Earth. No one can reproduce it, let alone innovate. Stark has been leading the world for nearly 2 decades. Monaco, the venue for F1, Nanjo is standing in a corner, watching the cars that are ready to start. And beside Nanjo, Hila stood. You people on Earth are really weird, is this kind of thing really so interesting? After all, the culture of life is different, and Hila does not understand the fun of many people on Earth. Fuse more into the human world, trust me, you will also be interested in things you didn't understand. Nanjo is also very interested in F1. Looking at Vettel, who is ready to go on the Red Bull racing team, you must know that this year's driver's champion is him. Although Nanjo came to the Marvel Universe, there were still many things in common with the universe where he originally lived. For example, the current F1 Moroccan Grand Prix. Definitely Nanjo came here not to watch F1. He has already noticed that Stark has replaced a driver of a team and he wants to forcefully participate in this F1 battle. In this F1 race, there will be major accidents. With the previous New York Hulk incident, Nanjo personally arrived just in case. As for why Gila will be there soon, this can only be said to be an exception. Staying in New York made Gila want to come out too, so she was soft and hard, and finally made Nanjo agree to take her with her. Definitely Nanjo also has his own requirements, that is, follow yourself and listen to everything. Gila naturally has no objection to this point. You said, is this stuff really that interesting? Seeing the roar of huge amounts of from the engine of the vehicle, Gila asked again. This is the pursuit of speed by the people of the Earth, and the appearance of the car is extremely in line with the aesthetics of the people of the Earth, coupled with the collision of the driver's technology, it will naturally be welcomed by the people of the Earth. Definitely, by comparison, I still prefer to watch these cars crash into each other, knocking out a part as a lot of money. Although it is a speed competition, to put it bluntly, it is still burning money. Following Nanjo's narration, this race is also the beginning, with countless vehicles sending out from the starting point. Not surprisingly, Stark, a driver who may not even be considered an amateur, was pulled behind. And Nanjo's attention was not on this. This F1 did not arouse Nanjo's interest. His eyes focused on a man in overalls. Whip, Mark Scott. Seeing him looking around, Nanjo knew that he wanted to do it. Naturally, Gila didn't know these things. Her eyes remained on the racing cars that were speeding on the track. From the point of view of the Earth people, the speed of this car is really fast, but for the Asgard person Gila, the speed is also that way. As time went on, the car had finished 5 laps one after another, and at this time, Mark Scott started to take action. He stepped out of the guardrail and walked slowly towards the direction where the car was speeding. Roar slowly took off his coat amidst everyone's shock, revealing the whip made by himself. Facing the oncoming car, it was a whip that was swiped, and the head of the car was instantly cut open and flew out. Fortunately, the driver did not receive any harm. The people at the moment have already screamed and rushed out of the field. They are not fools, and naturally know what is happening now. If you don't run now, then the whip will hit yourself later. Shengyan Wangye will not understand it. It's getting started. Nanjo and Gila did not follow the crowd to leave the audience due to the commotion of the crowd. They both quietly watched what happened now. You are here because of this? Gila asked. Nanjo did not deny, but nodded. Maybe I will make a move in a while, maybe I won't make a move either. Nanjo is waiting for Stark to become Iron Man and fight with the whip. Sure enough, the arrival of Harpy and Pepper brought the portable armor Mark V to Stark, and Tony Beast put the armor on his body in an extremely grand manner. Really handsome. Nanjo watched Stark put the armor on him, and couldn't help but say something. As a portable armor, Mark V does not have a flight device, and the only means of attack is a palm cannon. So in the face of the whip, both of Stark's palm cannons were broken and lost their function. However, all this is a normal development, and Nanjo did not act. But urgently, the development of things changed. Scott was swinging his whip faster and faster, and it seemed that he would not give Stark a chance to wrap the whip close to him at all. Even he in swinging his whip directly cut off half of Stark's helmet. It really is, that fool. Nanjo frowned, put on the mask directly, and threw a mask to Gila behind him. Take it, wait for me here, you can't go anywhere. With that said, Nanjo just leapt forward and went directly off the auditorium, falling in the middle of the two impartially. But at this moment, the whip of the lashing line also fell down and slammed Nanjo straight. Just watch Nanjo flash the whip sideways, and then held it with one hand. Let it crackle sparks in its own hands. Scott was also quite surprised to see that the person in front of him could actually hold his whip with his body. And Nanjo at the moment also saw the red radiating in Scott's pupils. He has confirmed that Scott also has the power of that guy, and it has become so strong. But this kind of power is okay in the face of Stark, and in the face of himself, it is undoubtedly a gift. Seeing him pull hard, Scott's whip snapped off, and the huge amounts of power also dragged Scott a bit. And Stark on the side immediately seized the opportunity when he saw this, and swiftly stepped forward, hitting Scott's face in a circle. Even if he had gained the power of that guy, Scott was still immortal after all. He was hit by Stark's iron fist and fainted instantly without any doubt. Seeing this scene, Nanjo shook his head. After all, the mortal fetus of the flesh is the mortal fetus of the flesh. Stark looked back and just wanted to say something, but he heard a few noises, and then a dozen people in black suits and armed with guns appeared on the track. These people are all from S.H.I.E.L.D. And their goal is Nanjo. They had only hoped that Nanjo would appear, but what they didn't expect was that Nanjo really appeared. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and they naturally can't miss it. Looking at these people, Nanjo smiled bitterly. It really verified that old saying, Fu Wushwang is here, misfortune never comes singly. Why are we running? On the streets of Morocco, masked Nanjo and Hila are running along the street, and behind them are the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Just run, I don't want to deal with them. Nanjo dragged Hila into an alley. Aren't you one of them? Hila didn't understand Nanjo's words. Nanjo was clearly an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and was the top agent. Why did he say such words? Because I am one of them, I know them, so I know how annoying they are. Looking at the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who even started the motorcycle behind him, Nanjo frowned. But at this time, Hila stopped. Even if you don't want to deal with them according to what you said, we are better than them, so we don't have to hide like this. With that said, Hila raised her hand with a palm, and directly pressed the speeding motorcycle. Later, he raised it directly and threw it out of the alley. The other agents didn't dare to move either. They didn't expect this woman who was with Darkseid to have such strength. Shall we knock them down? Hila knew that Nanjo would not allow her to kill, so she deliberately changed her words to knock down. But if Hila is Nanjo, maybe these people will not be spared, and death is their end. And their head S.H.I.E.L.D. will not die well, and Hila will also find them to settle accounts. The next step after S.H.I.E.L.D. is not reached is to rule the entire Earth, and then the entire universe. Anyway, the final goal is to rule the universe. At this moment, both ends of the Hutong were blocked by the people of S.H.I.E.L.D. They confined Nanjo and Hila in the Hutong. Then, blocking an armored vehicle at the entrance of the alley, a man with a machine gun walked down. Nanjo naturally recognized him, and now he is still the captain of the S.H.I.E.L.D. strike team, Brock Rumlow. Unexpectedly, he was here. Looking at Rumlow in front of him, Nanjo was a little surprised. He always thought that some S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were arresting himself. Unexpectedly, the captain of this strike group would also bring his men into battle. Ahem. Rumlow walked slowly into the alley, and he also put down his weapon in his hand, expressing his kindness. Mr. Darkseid, we are not hostile. I want to talk to you. Seeing that Rumlow didn't mean to be tough, Nanjo was also happy to chat with him. Why, what do you want to talk to me? The voice of Nanjo's mobile phone has been processed, because his own voice must be familiar to Rumlow. Although Nanjo already knows that Rumlow is a member of Hydra, he still has a lot of contact in his daily work, so Rumlow naturally knows his own voice. I'm from S.H.I.E.L.D. We hope you can join our S.H.I.E.L.D. and contribute to the protection of this world. Rumlow naturally knew the strength of the man in front of him, and he was definitely not an opponent. If you can't make things right, he might end up with the person who was thrown out before, so he is naturally a good voice. Protect the world. Nanjo really didn't expect Rumlow to say such a thing, which made him couldn't help but laugh. Then I watched Nanjo wave his hand. I am not interested in protecting the world. The reason why I stand in the same camp with you is because those enemies pose a threat to my interests. But if one day, your bullshit S.H.I.E.L.D. also poses a threat to my interests, I will still be ruthlessly wiped out. Nanjo's words and then the expression on Rumlow's face was a bit gloomy. Although he also hopes that S.H.I.E.L.D. can quickly touch the interests of the man in front of him, so that he can quickly destroy S.H.I.E.L.D. But this person's words were extremely arrogant, which naturally made Rumlow very dissatisfied. S.H.I.E.L.D. is not as fragile as you thought. Although Rumlow was eager for Nanjo to do it sooner, but now it's okay. Nanjo naturally couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. It is not only funny to say this, but it is also said from the mouth of the Hydra spy, Rumlow, which has a more comic effect. Rumlow naturally heard the ridicule in Nanjo's tone, and his face was gloomy. But Nanjo naturally didn't want to continue chatting with him, so he looked at Hila next to him. Hila naturally understood it, grabbed Nanjo next door, and flew directly into the sky. Although Nanjo will not fly for the time being, Hila will. Although Nanjo brought Hila to another reason because of this. Who can refuse a free flight device? Seeing Nanjo flying away, Rumlow didn't expect this result either. According to the report, the Darkseid could not fly at all and could only move on land, so they did not have airplanes guarding the surrounding area. It seems that when the report is submitted, it must be stated that he has a flight device. Rumlow said and waved his hand to signal to accept and retreat. This time, the natural page count ended in failure. I think it's better for you to eliminate the troubles. In the sky, Gila grabbed Nanjo's and ran away, rushed to New York and flew away. Although it has to cross the ocean, it is not a problem for Gila, even faster than the fastest aircraft in the world. Listening to Hela's words, Nanjo fell into thinking. He naturally knew that what Gila said to him was actually killing S.H.I.E.L.D. If Nanjo doesn't play, Gila can take up this role. Having not killed anyone for so many years, Gila naturally has itchy hands. But this is not what Nanjo thought. Hela's words gave Nanjo an idea, one that is a little bold, but the pigeon has become a way to live well for a period of time. And the way Nanjo was thinking also made Gila a little surprised. Could it be that this guy really had a murderous heart? In Hela's eyes, Nanjo has always been the kind of living bodhisattva. He has been asking Gila not to kill. Some people who insulted Gila with words, Nanjo did not allow Gila to kill them. In fact, this was not because Nanjo was kind-hearted, but Nanjo didn't want Gila to regain the bloodthirsty comfort. That Gila will gradually become uncontrollable. But Gila didn't think so. She thought Nanjo was the kind of person who seemed to be kind-hearted. Now, it seems that he really has a murderous intention, which makes Gila look forward to it very much. If you really want to slaughter the entire S.H.I.E.L.D., Gila will naturally be the first to stand up and come forward. At the moment Nanjo has already thought about the countermeasures. Let's turn around, stop going back to New York, and go straight to Washington. Gila was overjoyed when he heard this. Washington is the headquarters of S.H.I.E.L.D. It seems that Nanjo really has to make up his mind to completely solve the troubles. Late at night, Washington, S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Nick is collating the day's report in his office. This includes the report submitted by Rumlow that Darkseid had an additional flight device. Looking at Rumlow's report, Nick frowned. Suddenly there was another woman who was equally powerful and even capable of flight beside this Darkseid. This is neither good news nor bad news for Nick. But for this Darkseid, Nick's head is going to be bigger. The real comes and goes without a trace. Even Rumlow's strike team failed. However, the failure is expected. As a terrorist character with such power, it cannot be solved by a simple Rumlow and a strike team. At this moment, the office lights suddenly started to flicker. This made Nick feel very strange. He got up and walked in the direction of the light switch. But suddenly, the lights went out instantly, and the lights at the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters went out. The room became dark. Years of agent experience naturally made Nick notice something wrong. He turned his head abruptly, and by the moonlight he saw a man in a hoodie standing in front of the French windows. "Who are you?" Nick looked nervous and slowly stretched his hand to his waist. He appeared in the closed office without knowing it. Obviously, this person is definitely not simple. "I advise you not to take a gun. If you take a gun, it will be difficult for me to handle it." The man slowly walked forward, and under the moonlight, Nick finally saw the man's face clearly. He wears a mask, and this mask is what Darkseid wears. "You are Darkseid." Nick was quite surprised. This person is Darkseid, which is Nanjo. Nanjo smiled faintly, and then sat down on the sofa aside. Nick at the moment became more uncertain. The person in front of him is the Darkseid that he has been thinking about. The reason why he came here, Nick can naturally guess. It's not necessary for me to explain why. Nanjo naturally knew that Nick was a smart person, so he planned to get straight to the point. Nick at the moment also sat in his place. "It seems that my person today makes you very unhappy." Nick doesn't dare to act rashly. Such a person may be able to shelter himself instantly with a single thought. It seems that the famous director Nick Fury is still smart. Nanjo tilted Erlang's legs and looked very arrogant. "I know that you have been investigating me, and I also know that you can't find out what you are investigating. Actually, your investigation made me very upset, but I didn't care, but this time, you really annoyed me." Nanjo's words touched Nick's heartstrings, and Nick could naturally hear the threat and killing intent in Nanjo's tone. "This is also a helpless thing, and I hope you understand me." Nick at the moment also responded with a smile. After all, as a powerful and uncontrollable existence like you, I, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., naturally have to pay attention. I know you don't like my approach, but this is my duty. I have no other way. Nick is telling the truth. Like this makes a powerful person. Nick will not be relieved if he doesn't know his details. Although he has helped S.H.I.E.L.D. several times and it is considered to maintain peace, Nick still does not know his position. These few times may be on the same front with him. What if he stands on the opposite side of him afterwards? Nick must consider such a thing, which is why Nick investigates Nanjo. I naturally know your difficulties, but what does this have to do with me? Nanjo is completely unreasonable. He didn't want to think about it from the other side's point of view. If everything is considered from the other side's perspective, then the world hasn't moved. This is what Peggy told himself when he was doing agent training. It is not always necessary to consider from the perspective of the other party. The agent must be decisive and ruthless. I don't want to have anything to do with you, do you know? Nanjo continued. I can tell you clearly, I only care about myself. I have no idea about destroying the world or domination of the world. I just want to live a free life in peace. The people I killed have only touched my interests. I have no choice but to kill them. Most people can't touch my interests, but if someone really wants to die, I can't help it. Nanjo's words have already indicated an attitude. He has no intention of standing on the opposite side of S.H.I.E.L.D. Definitely, this is also a step for Nick. With Nanjo, Nick can honestly cancel the investigation of Nanjo. If Nick remains unwilling to change, then he can't blame Nanjo for being black. I definitely know that your S.H.I.E.L.D. has a killer in outer space, but this is not a problem for me. When Nanjo said this, Nick was even more surprised. It turned out that this guy even knew about Carol. So, I mean, you drop. Understand. After Nanjo finished speaking, he looked at Nick. And Nick nodded sensibly. Although as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., his soft service has hit a huge amount of S.H.I.E.L.D. members. But there is no one else. If you are soft, your relationship will not become so tense. Why not do it? Upon seeing this, Nanjo smiled in satisfaction. Nick has always been a person who knows the current affairs, which Nanjo recognizes him very much. Although his heart was still very upset, and he was holding a sigh of breath in his heart, what did this have to do with Nanjo? Just watching Nanjo got up and came to the huge amounts of floor-to-ceiling window, opened the window. I hope you don't regret it when you say it. I don't like people who don't keep their promises. After all, Nanjo jumped straight down. When Nick saw this scene, he immediately walked up and found that Nanjo was nowhere to be seen. And then, the entire S.H.I.E.L.D. power supply was restored. This is S.H.I.E.L.D. It is really shameful to be hacked into the power supply system so easily. It looks like we need to change to a more powerful system. Let's find Stark. No, neither can Stark. At the moment Nick was upset, sitting in his position rubbing his eyes. I thought you would do it, taking it so disappointed. On the top of the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nanjo and Gila are watching the scenery of Washington, D.C. And Gila also expressed dissatisfaction with Nanjo. I thought that Nanjo would carry out a massacre and devastation in S.H.I.E.L.D. Whoever thought, this is it. When did I say I was going to kill someone? Nanjo glanced at Gila contemptuously. You are also the noble Asgard in your mouth. Can you not be like a barbarian who knows how to kill every day? Why do you need to do something that can be solved with your mouth? Nanjo's mocking words made Hela's face sink. If I can't beat you now, when I recover my strength, you will wait to pay the price. Nanjo couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Don't worry, when you regain your strength, you will find that you still can't kill me. Why is the task of investigating Darkseid suddenly cancelled? Natasha Romanoff was in Stark Industries and suddenly received a call from Nick. Hearing what Nick said, Natasha Romanoff was a little surprised. She worked so hard for so long, and Nick was about to end the task in one sentence. This naturally made Natasha Romanoff somewhat unacceptable. Has the true identity of Darkseid been found? Natasha Romanoff still knows Nick. In her opinion, Nick's termination of the investigation is probably because he discovered the true identity of Darkseid. But Nick on the phone was silent. This makes Natasha Romanoff feel a little bad. After a while, Nick slowly said, You don't need to care about this, as long as you know that you don't need to continue investigating Darkseid. Nick's words are very tough. This is not a suggestion, but an order. Natasha Romanoff leaned on one side of the wall, rubbed his eyesight, and then sighed. I see. After that, Natasha Romanoff hung up the phone. Darkseid's affairs have already made her utterly devastated, but she didn't want to just give up unclearly. Nick doesn't want to tell himself why. It must be wrong. Natasha Romanoff looked at Pepper, who was busy at the moment. Perhaps the absence of the task of investigating is a good thing for Natasha Romanoff, and it can make her relaxed. But what she likes more is the beginning and the end, so she decided to continue to investigate. On Nick's side, all the agents monitoring near the Stark mansion have been revoked. Nanjo's words of wishing him to do what he said have been lingering in his heart. This is the first time Nick has been so jealous of a person in so many years. When he was communicating with that person, he could clearly feel the threat of death. As long as that person moved his finger, he would disappear into smoke. If I used it in New York, I use the same trick. Then I might even save the time to go to the crematorium. Cremated directly on the spot, completely returned to the heaven and earth. And that person also knew about Carol, so naturally he knew what Carol had done. Even so, he didn't have any fear, and he didn't seem to put Carol in his eyes at all. Nick doesn't know whether he and Carol are strong or weak. But with that person's tone, it can be heard that this person and Carol may have the same strength. Nick thought of this and clenched his fists tightly. He is naturally unwilling, and this approach is undoubtedly a compromise to that person. He is the dignified director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Facing a powerful person, he will directly compromise. How can he be worthy of his identity? It seems that the Avengers project needs to speed up the process. Nick knows that only by having a team that can wrestle with this guy can he be able to negotiate terms with him, otherwise it will be useless. At this moment, Phil Coulson entered Nick's office. Nick, why do you want to cancel the task? Phil Coulson naturally knew Nick's order, and with a puzzled mentality, Phil Coulson came to Nick's office. There is no reason, just execute it. Nick rubbed his eyes and waved his hand impatiently. He naturally knew that the group of people under his hands would definitely ask why one by one. But how can I tell the truth? They can only be dismissed one by one. Phil Coulson looks at Nick, who is extremely annoyed at the moment. Nick like this is rare. Phil Coulson naturally thinks that this matter must have nothing to do with Nanjo. He just nodded, did not continue to speak, and left Nick's office wittily. As soon as he left, he turned his head and dialed Nanjo's number. Soon, the call was connected. What's wrong? Nanjo's voice came from the other end of the phone. Nick suddenly revoked the order to investigate you. Is this matter related to you? Phil Coulson didn't hide anything, and said straightforwardly. Yes, I contacted him directly last night and negotiated terms with him. Upon hearing Nanjo's words, Phil Coulson snorted coldly. Did you talk about terms? You threatened him. Huh, why do you say that? I talked to him calmly. Nanjo naturally didn't think he was threatening Nick. After all, they were not rough, and the conversation was very harmonious. At least Nick didn't drop the cup and smash the stool. But after listening to Nanjo, Phil Coulson already had his own opinion. Nanjo said that he was just negotiating terms, but Phil Coulson didn't believe it. Nanjo absolutely used his own threats. As for Nick, he just didn't dare to have an attack. After all, he didn't know whether Nanjo would destroy himself. After talking to Nanjo on the phone, Phil Coulson also knew the specific situation and couldn't help but feel sorry for Nick. Who caused him to provoke Nanjo? After hanging up the phone, Phil Coulson curled his lips and then walked out of S.H.I.E.L.D. At the same time, New York. Nanjo is being dragged by Gila to go shopping, and now he has nothing to worry about. Nick also revoked his order to investigate himself. It can be seen that this person really understands things and knows what can be done and what cannot be done. But the only troublesome thing now is that the existence has been strengthening the opponent and preventing itself from growing. But that existence seemed to underestimate his own strength, and no opponent could threaten him. Only the hatred is trickier. This whip is currently looking at a batch of dishes. I don't know what it will look like next. After all, now is the beginning. At this time, Gila came to Nanjo's side with a cup of yerba mate. For some reason, Hila seems to have a soft spot for this yerba mate, which tastes like cigarette butts in water. That Nick, did he do it? Hila asked. Nanjo nodded. Yes, he has already ordered the cancellation of my investigation. Hila snorted coldly when he heard this. If you want me to say, it is best to kill, so as to avoid future troubles, and then I will rule the world and rule the universe. Hila started to have the dream of ruling the world again, which made Nanjo speechless. This goddess of death dreams of ruling the universe by herself all the time. I have been imprisoned for 1,000 years, and this kind of thinking is getting stronger and stronger. If it is not stopped and corrected, the thoughts that are already approaching morbidity will become more and more morbid. In the end, her ending will become her original ending. Although Nanjo did not want to change the historical process of the entire universe. But this process of Hila has been modified into this way, and Nanjo naturally didn't care. The changes have been changed, so let's change them thoroughly. As always, New York is still sunny. Nanjo opened the curtains in the living room and looked at the prosperous New York City shining by the sun outside the window. He doesn't know this is the first few days he has slept on the sofa. His bedroom was forcibly occupied by Hila, so he had to sleep on the sofa. At this moment, Nanjo's phone rang. Picking up the phone, I found that the caller ID was Tony Stark. Nanjo answered the phone, and Stark's voice spread from the other end of the phone. My friend, there is a party at my house tonight. I wonder if you would like to show your face and have fun. Stark's voice on the other end of the phone was a bit drunk, but it was early in the morning, which was enough to prove that he had a hangover last night. Nanjo is not surprising about this. Forget it, there are so many people in your place, no wonder I went there, don't steal your limelight then. Definitely, this is just Nanjo's excuse, after all, he doesn't want to be involved in that mess. Stark sighed slightly disappointed when he heard Nanjo's words. He seemed to hope that Nanjo could come to his party, but since Nanjo said that he didn't have time to come, he couldn't say anything by himself. It's a shame, I know. Stark and Nanjo chatted again, and then hung up. As soon as Nanjo put down the phone, Hila walked out of Nanjo's room. She stretched her waist and walked to Nanjo's side with her long legs, rubbing her eyes. Do you have any breakfast? Hila asked. There are sandwiches on the dinner table. Get them if you want to eat them. Nanjo sat down on the sofa and turned on the TV. The news that Hanmer Industries will open an expo in New York is being broadcast on TV. After Stark opened the expo, Hanmer would naturally not be content with the status quo, otherwise he would not help Ivan Venki escape from prison, and then form a cooperative relationship with him to create such a steel army. I'm curious, do you mortals like to do these flashy things? Hila at the moment took a sandwich from the kitchen and then sat next to Nanjo. In her opinion, these so-called expositions, so-called battle armors, are nothing more than gorgeous but not practical things. These may not be practical to you, but to this world, they are very scary weapons. Although he has lived in this world for so long, Hila still has not fully integrated into the social life of the earth. Otherwise, such a question would not be asked. These weapons may not be worth mentioning in your eyes, but in this world, if mass production can be carried out, then these weapons are enough to dominate the world. The weapons in Nanjo's mouth are naturally the steel battle suits made by Stark. Hila curled her lips when she heard this. I have to say that this world is really weak and small. If it is in his heyday, he may not be able to stand it for a day, and he will be thoroughly informed. But this world has a terrifying guy like Nanjo. Although Nanjo is an outsider, it is currently protecting the world, so there is an unknown in this world. In Hela's view, this is extremely contradictory. Time came to the next day in a blink of an eye, and something big happened. There was a huge amount of battle in Stark's mansion, and most of the entire mansion was destroyed. Rhodes put on Mark II and had an epic duel with Stark at home, where the two Iron Mons fought in the Iron Man mansion. In that scene, chickens and dogs jumped. Finally, Rhodes wore Mark II and flew back to his military base. This news was greatly suppressed. At that time, the members who participated in the Stark Mansion party were also paid a large amount of hush money, which calmed the commotion. If this matter is heated up by the media, the blow to Stark Industry will be fatal. Originally, Ivan Venki's affairs in Morocco have caused the stock of Stark Industries to fall a lot. Pepper is now the CEO of Stark Industries, and he absolutely can't let the company's stock fall sharply. And what about Stark at the moment? Long ago no longer in his own mansion. In the current mansion, only Ethan is left to clean up the mess. Looking at this dilapidated mansion, Ethan was helpless. Ethan had expected Stark to become what it is now. Now the symptoms of palladium poisoning have completely appeared on the surface of his body. Not only the chest, but now it has spread to the neck and even the face. The proportion of palladium in his blood has even reached 90%. Stark knew that he was dead soon. All the absurd things now are based on this foundation. Ethan knew that Stark was looking for an element that could replace palladium. But they arranged and combined the left and right elements, but in the end, without exception, they all failed. Now there is no substitute for palladium. This thing that saved Stark's life is also killing Stark. If Stark doesn't quickly find an element that can replace the palladium element, he may not survive for 3 months. At the moment Stark is lying on a sculpture of huge amounts of donuts, holding the donuts he just bought. There are still some bruises on his forehead, which seems to have been caused by the fight with Rod. "Sir, I want you to come down from that big donut." At this time, a voice came not far from Stark. Stark looked for his reputation and found a black man standing there. Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. At the moment Nick's face is very ugly. "I just met with that Darkseid, and finally let myself lose face as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and revoked this order amidst the doubts of many subordinates. And now, this Tony Stark is also causing trouble for himself. Now he has become like this. As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the main person in charge of the Avengers project, he absolutely can't ignore it, so there is no way but to stand up. Now I am afraid that I will become a confidant big brother to solve Stark's inner problems." Watching Stark take off his sunglasses and looking at himself, Nick rolled his eyes and walked into the shop under the sculpture. Stark also turned over and got off the sculpture, and followed him in. "Obviously I have more important things in New Mexico, and now I have to stand up and solve the problem for him." Seeing this Stark sitting in front of him, still a little dazed, Nick was a little out of breath. This Stark is forcing himself to regard him as the center of his universe. "Hey, Nanjo, do you have time for activities? Go to New Mexico." Nanjo received a call from Nick, and on the other end of the call, Nick wanted Nanjo to do something. Nick had to stay here to solve Stark's affairs because of Stark's affairs. As for New Mexico, he couldn't get away at all, so he hoped that Nanjo would go to that place. "I'm afraid it won't work." Nanjo leaned on the sofa and watched TV, and answered casually. Nanjo naturally knew what had happened in New Mexico. It was a place where he was rewarded with succession degree. He naturally wanted to go. But not now. And Nanjo's reply also surprised Nick a bit. Why, there are some things on my side that can't go away. I think Phil Coulson is more suitable than me. Let him solve it." Nanjo's reply was extremely perfunctory, which made Nick feel a little angry. But getting angry now can't solve the problem. The top priority now is to find someone who can really go. Since Nanjo is unwilling to go, Nick can only go to Phil Coulson. Such Nanjo Nick is very used to it. After all, he often does this, so he doesn't plan to punish him anymore. On Nanjo's side, after hanging up the phone, he got up and walked towards the garage. He is now very close to 10% of the Darkseid template. Today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, he will be able to complete a new daily task once again. After completing this daily task, Nanjo has completed 30 daily tasks, which is another 1% reward. Degree of inheritance. Then, his Darkseid template inheritance rate will reach 10%. And when he reached 10%, it was the time of the Hanmer Industry Expo. No matter what skills are rewarded by Darkseid, he can experiment well. "I hope it's Omega rays." Nanjo walked and prayed. He had been exposed to Omega radiation for such a long time. If he couldn't get a Darkseid signature skill, it would be too frustrated. At the moment, California, in Stark's mansion. Nick put the phone in his arms, then let out a long sigh. Did he agree? Natasha Romanoff behind Nick asked at this moment. Natasha Romanoff obviously asked this question knowingly. After all, you can tell from Nick's expression. Nanjo directly rejected the task. Not only did he refuse the task, he also pushed Phil Coulson up. Nick rubbed his eyes. Nanjo really made him wonder what to do. Now that Peggy is still alive, Nanjo can still listen to his dispatch sometimes, but if Peggy is gone one day, will Nanjo completely become an uncontrollable existence? As soon as he thought that Peggy had just walked through the ghost gate some time ago, Nick had to make such a mental preparation. It is very likely that Nanjo will be completely separated from S.H.I.E.L.D. after Peggy's death. And S.H.I.E.L.D. will not allow such a powerful agent to be controlled by anyone. So Nanjo is likely to become a threat to S.H.I.E.L.D. Thinking of this, Nick became even more depressed, sighed helplessly, and then rubbed his eyes. But he is in New York. It will be the Hanmer Industry Expo in a few days. He is in New York now. Maybe he can have a caregiver at that time. Natasha Romanoff doesn't know what to say to relieve Nick's depressed mood now, and can only talk about this matter. Nick listened to Natasha Romanoff's comfort, waved his hand, and then left the Stark mansion. Natasha Romanoff, who continues to serve as Pepper's secretary, and Phil Coulson, who monitors Stark, are left behind. As for Phil Coulson, after handling Stark's affairs, he will leave for New Mexico. When Phil Coulson knew that Nanjo had thrown this task directly to himself, he was also speechless for a while. I thought that after dealing with Stark, I applied for a holiday with Nick. It now seems that the long-lost holiday is about to fall through. You have always wanted to ask, how do you keep your body from being damaged when you stay in this room full of such terrifying radiation every day? Nanjo at the moment has come out of that room and returned to his home. Nanjo has installed a simple shower room in his garage. Now he takes a shower directly after he comes out of the room, and then he changes his clothes and returns to his home. After all, there is still a Gila in the house, and he just went home rough. If he bumped into it, that one would be too embarrassing. So when Nanjo came back, he had already changed his clothes. But Gila didn't understand very much. Although this Nanjo was an outsider, his body structure was obviously still the same. Why such deadly radiation could not harm him? Is this person so strong? How to say? After hearing Hela's words, Nanjo stroked his chin, thinking about how to answer this question. I can only say that there is still a big gap between my body and yours. With that, Nanjo picked up the cup and fiddled with it in his hand. Although the body structure is the same, there are still some differences that you can't detect at all, and there are big differences. Nanjo said, smiling at Gila. If you want to really understand me, you have to spend more time with me. The secrets in me are many times more than you don't know. Gila naturally did not deny this. After all, Nanjo must have more secrets than herself. If you say who is the most mysterious person in this world, that was undoubtedly this foreigner, Nanjo. Little by little time passed, and the Hanmer Industry Expo officially arrived. At the moment, Nanjo was in his room, counting the time excitedly. The 5 hours have passed closer and closer, and Nanjo could even feel the sound of his own heartbeat. It seems that I haven't been so excited for a long time. Looking at the clock hanging outside the room, the second hand is getting closer and closer to the 5-hour time limit. Nanjo had even begun to count down, and this long-term expectation made him very excited. He wanted to know what kind of skills he would acquire this time. Ding! Congratulations to the host for the daily mission. The host has reached 30 daily missions, and the inheritance of the Darkseid template is increased by 1%. As the 5-hour time limit came, a long-lost system sound came from Nanjo's ears. Ding! The host's Darkseid template has reached 10%, and now a new skill is unlocked. Congratulations to the host for acquiring the flight skill. When Nanjo heard this, he stood up instantly. He heard it right, he got the flight skill. He can fly. Nanjo has acquired the skill of flight. Although it is not the Omega Ray he has in mind, this flight is definitely not a loss. At the moment when Nanjo was extremely excited, a big problem occurred at the Hanmer Industry Expo. Nanjo's cell phone rang at this time. Nick who called. Nanjo, are you in New York now? There is a problem with the Hanmer Expo, come on. Nick's voice came from the other side of the phone. Huh, what's the problem? I'm not in your New York, I'm in Texas. Nanjo pretended to be ignorant and said, are you in Texas? Nick was completely angry this time. Can't you just stay in New York honestly? I said, I have something to deal with recently, so I am in Texas. Nanjo's words made Nick choke and don't know what to say. Because Nanjo is also reasonable. After all, Nick didn't ask him to stay in New York. He is free to go wherever he goes. This thing can only be lost in the stomach. After you finish your business, do you know if you go to New Mexico? After hearing a long sigh, Nick spoke. Understood. Nanjo also knows what it means to be cheap and good, so he readily agreed. At the moment, at the Hanmer Industry Fair, the UAV battle armor built by Ivan Vanke was completely out of control, and even the Mark II that was transformed by Hanmer was also controlled by Vanke. Their goal is only one, and that is Tony Stark. All battle armors were created to kill Tony Stark. As for the cooperation with Hanmer, that is to get a good production environment. Tony, be careful, I locked you down. Rod at the moment was in War Machine, he couldn't do anything at all, he could only constantly remind Stark with the communicator. This made Stark a little upset. Since Stark got his father Howard from Nick, Stark left the remains of S.H.I.E.L.D. Relying on the video his father left for him, plus his own IQ, he successfully created a new element and successfully replaced the palladium element without any side effects. So Stark succeeded, he survived, with the help of his father. And his coming this time is also to smash Vanke's conspiracy. With the battle suit of new elements, the strength is stronger than before. But Vanke has a lot of drone robots. He can't fight them in the city, he can only lead them out of the city center. At this moment, Stark's armor radar suddenly detected a fast approaching target. What is this? Let the satellite send me the picture. In short time, JARVIS transmitted the satellite image directly to Stark's armor. This is. Stark was stunned when he looked at this person who had been shining clearly under the light. He is familiar with a piece of clothing because he made it. Darkseid. Why did he come? And, he can fly. Stark naturally saw who the fast approaching person was, which was Darkseid, and Nanjo. Although it has reached 10%, Nanjo does not intend to give up this opportunity to increase his inheritance, so he flies directly over with the flight skill. But his flight looks very rusty, and it is easy to lose control of his balance, flying sloppy. At first glance, I just learned to flight. At the moment, Nanjo had seen the numerous unmanned robots chasing Stark, an unmanned robot that speeded up and went straight to the pile of flight. At the moment of arrival, he directly grabbed the two closest ones, and then pulled them off the flight route, and then directly smashed into the square below. Then Nanjo pulled out two mechanical heads and smashed them to pieces. It's not easy to control. Nanjo sighed, patted the dust on his body, then threw the crushed robot head aside, and then flew into the sky again. The feeling of flying is really cool. Whether it was able to make the scenery below look speechless, or the speed that made people difficult to refuse, Nanjo could feel it. Definitely, now is not the time to enjoy, he has to do something. Although he didn't want to come out to help Stark, because he thought Stark alone was enough. But in order to proficiently carry out the flight, Nanjo also plans to practice with these people. Just watch Nanjo speed up, and press the three robots to the ground again, crushing their heads so that they can't move at all. And all this was seen by Ivan Vanke. Obviously the appearance of this person was something he didn't expect. This completely disrupted my plan. Although he could not be sure if this person was the one who caught his whip directly with one hand, this person felt very similar to him. Hey, the clothes look really suitable for you. Nanjo solved a few more robots and came to Stark's side. Stark saw Nanjo's clothes and couldn't help talking. I have one thing to say, it's really good, I like it very much. This red and black battle suit really pokes Nanjo's aesthetics. The professional one is different. Are you here to help me? Stark asked again, and Nanjo hesitation, and then lit the electric heater. You can understand that. Before Stark could reply, the war machine behind him speeded up and grabbed Stark's foot. Then both of them planted and fell into the park. While the two were still fighting, Nanjo solved a few miscellaneous fish. At the moment, Natasha Romanoff and Happy have also broken into Vanke's workplace in Hanmer Industries. Definitely, Vanke has long since escaped. And Natasha Romanoff also relied on his own ability, and quickly liberated Rhodes' war machine, allowing him to be free. Hey brother, how about returning this song armor to you, it's really uncomfortable to be manipulated. Luo Loha stood up panting heavily, and while talking, his eyes were on Nanjo's body. Presumably, you are the now famous Darkseid. The name Rod is naturally known. With that, Rod also stretched out his hand. James Rhodes. Now that Luo had stretched out his hand, Nanjo also stretched out his hand to shake it up. Darkseid. After shaking hands and saluting, Rod looked at Stark. So, you never told me about your knowledge of him. As Stark has always been a close friend, Rod is naturally a little emotional. But Stark just smiled awkwardly. After all, he didn't let me say it, what can I do? With his strength, as long as he waved his hand, Iron Man is gone. You will lose your best friend. Don't worry, Nanjo interrupted Stark suddenly. I still have shares in your company. It won't be that simple to let you die. With you, I will make money. As Stark, Luo and Nanjo were talking, those unmanned robots controlled by Venki had surrounded them. It's troublesome, these people. Rode put on the mask, and Stark put on the mask as well. At this moment, Stark looked at Nanjo, who was aside. You will help us. Nanjo tilted his head at this moment. Then help you. Hearing Nanjo's words, both Rod and Stark smiled slightly. Suddenly, the robots that surrounded the three people stretched out their human weapons and aimed at them. If you have anything, let's talk about it after solving the problem. When the voice fell, Stark and Rod both mobilized their own weapons, defending against the bullets of these machines, and counter-attacking at the same time. As for Nanjo, he didn't want to increase the limelight of those two people. After all, the two of them were the protagonists of this incident. If one is not careful, the final reward may be gone, so Nanjo is naturally better off paddling. Is this guy an Earthling? At this time, Luo noticed Nanjo, who was paddling, and found that he had punched through the body of a machine with one punch, and then walked to the front of another machine with all his heart, and punched him too. The efficiency of this punch for a kid makes Rod a little envious. In addition to the previous Hulk incident, he was more familiar with suspecting that the person in front of him was not a human being at all. I don't know that. Stark shot through a robot, then responded. Neither have I seen the face under this man's mask. Stark didn't want to look at the appearance under Nanjo's mask all the time. He imagined many kinds, but none of them seemed to fit this body. Isn't there an alien or something under this guy's mask? As Rod said, the images of aliens in some movies he had watched appeared in his mind. Don't say a few words. Stark glanced at Rod silently. If someone is unhappy, you have to think about your fate. Hearing this, Rod immediately shut his mouth. After all, that person has a better relationship with Stark, and he has a very normal relationship with himself. If he upsets him, maybe Stark can't keep himself. While the two were talking, they were frantically slaughtering the robots. Even the robots that arrived one after another were defeated by the three. These were Venki, relying on the resources of Hanmer Industries to build the robot army. The whole army was wiped out. These trash fish are still easy to solve. Stark breathed a sigh of relief, and it seemed that the problem had been resolved. The biggest trouble now is that behind-the-scenes boss, Ivan Venki, who hasn't appeared yet. Where did that Ivan Venki go? It would be troublesome if it ran away. Rod at the moment said. At this time, Nanjo stood up. Don't worry, you don't need to find him at all, he will come to you himself. With that, Nanjo raised his head and looked towards the dark night. Stark, something is moving fast in your direction. At this moment, Natasha Romanoff's voice came over. I don't know what that thing is, it may not be very good. And then, this thing that Natasha Romanoff didn't know what it was, fell in front of the three of Nanjo. A battle armor that is somewhat similar to the Iron Overlord. Just looking at the two discharge whips extending from the armor of the battle armor, the helmet on the head of the battle armor was also taken off. And the person inside is the whip, Ivan Venki. It's nice to have a meeting. Venki smiled and looked at Stark, but when he looked at Nanjo, it was obviously jealous. Venki dare not easily provoke this person who can catch the whip with high voltage with one hand. But he had already made this step, and he had to continue. Wow, this is not so good. Rod spoke at this moment. But I prepared a special gift for this guy. Rod slowly stepped forward in a very confident tone, and a small warhead appeared on the left shoulder of his armor. I'm going to blow up his strong fortress with my ex-wife. As soon as Rod's words came out, it was Stark's turn to be a little confused. What is it? Ex-wife. Before Stark's voice fell, the small warhead named Ex-Wife on Rod's shoulder was launched. But Ivan did not hide, smiled and watched the bullet hit him. Hearing a ding sound, the warhead did not cause any damage to Venki. Instead, it fell into the stagnant water at Venki's feet and directly extinguished the fire. This atmosphere was instantly embarrassing to the extreme. Although Nanjo had known this result a long time ago, when he really saw it, he couldn't help but embarrassed him. This is a famous scene, and the system doesn't give me some rewards. However, this was only Nanjo's wishful thinking, and the system naturally did not move. Ah, Stark looked at Rod. So, is this thing made by Hanmer? Luo nodded slightly, and his embarrassment could be seen in this gesture. Hammer's things have always been unreliable, and you are bold enough to use them. At this time Stark didn't forget to ridicule Rod. Then, Stark also stood up. At this time, let me stand up. With that said, Stark's shoulders also raised arms, aimed at Venki's neck and head, and then the warhead shot out. Obviously, Venki's attitude towards Stark is different from that towards Rod. He dare not care about Stark's weapons. After all, the weapons on Stark weren't made by Hanmer, and in terms of quality, there would be no embarrassing things like the former wife. Just watch him quickly put on his mask, blocking all Stark's warheads on the solid metal armor. Then he waved his long whip against Stark and Rod. Seeing this, the two quickly avoided. On the side, Nanjo was sitting leisurely on the rock on the side. He did not intend to participate in this battle. If you accidentally strengthen the head, there is no reward. So Nanjo will never make a move. Even if Venki's target is locked on himself, he will never make a move. Hey, what are you doing? Obviously, Nanjo's actions were seen by Stark and Luo. Both of them were puzzled by Nanjo's actions. This is up to you, I won't do it. Facing the two people's questions, Nanjo slowly spoke. Relax, I believe you, you will defeat him, come on. Chapter 71. Without Nanjo's help, Stark and Luo naturally fell into a bitter battle. Fighting on this narrow terrain, the whip on the lashing armor is quite beneficial to the battle. The two naturally fell into a hard fight. Are you really not coming to help? At the moment Stark and Rod were both controlled by the whip of the lashing, no matter how to break free, it would not help. Facing Lord's question, Nanjo still smiled and shook his head. You can think that I am exercising you, how? Nanjo's words made Luo quite speechless, but before he said anything to refute, he was thrown out by the whip. The whip naturally also saw that Nanjo would not make a move. Although he didn't understand the reason, he still let out a long sigh of relief. He hoped that when he destroyed Iron Man himself, this person would not stand up either. And the reason why Nanjo didn't make a move was because he could see that this Ivan Venki didn't get the power of existence. It may be because the strength of mortals is still too weak, and the body will not be able to support it if the strength of existence is obtained. Or maybe, even if you get the power of existence, your strength won't be much improved. However, Nanjo no longer wanted to know the specific reason. As long as Venki didn't get the power of existence, then he wouldn't make a move. After all, under normal circumstances, Stark and Rod both defeated this man together, so they would win if they didn't make a move. Looking at the two embarrassed at the moment, Nanjo hoped that there would be a bowl of melon seeds beside him. Think of it as watching an immersive movie. At this moment, Stark fell by Nanjo's side. At the moment, Stark's red gold battle armor also turned black, and the whip of the lashes hurt quite terribly. If there is no such armor to protect him, then he is likely to be beaten into a corpse by a whip. Do you have the heart to watch you do this? Stark, like Rod, still questioned Nanjo, asking from the bottom of his heart. And Nanjo was still smiling. I definitely bear it, you guys come on. Looking at the two people who had nothing to do it at the moment, Nanjo once thought that the existence was still a shot, and the targets of the shot were Stark and Rod. He lowered the top of the two. Think about your tactics for fighting at the party. Nanjo played Stark on demand, hoping that he would remember that move. Stark deserves to be a genius. When Nanjo said that, he immediately remembered what happened in his mansion. Rod drove the Mark II to fight with himself. You were at my house that day? Stark questioned, because he obviously remembered that he had called this guy before, and this guy had simply refused. I naturally have a way to know. Nanjo was also quite speechless. Who would have thought that the focus of this Stark's thinking was actually this? When Nanjo said so, Stark reacted immediately and immediately started communicating with Rod on the radio. And Rod also gave a reply. It just depends on the two being restricted by Venki once again. This time the two were one behind the other, directly surrounding Venki. Rod, it's time, Stark said, raising his hand, and Rod did the same. Venki naturally didn't know what the two of them were doing, but instinctively told him that something bad was about to happen. Immediately afterwards, Stark and the palm cannon fired light cannons. The two cannons converged together, producing huge amounts of shock waves. And Venki, at a position less than 30 centimeters from the huge shock, was hit head-on by this shock. Along with huge amounts of smoke and dust, Stark and Rod were also blown away. As for Venki, after the smoke dissipated, Nanjo walked up curiously and found that although the upper body of Venki was intact, the lower body was bloody. Naturally, his fate was soon to die. Just look at Venki grinning and looking at Nanjo. If you come too, I'm afraid I will lose faster. As he said, he let out a gloomy laugh. Although I lost, I won in the end. As soon as the voice fell, it was seen that the core of Venki's battle armor began to emit red light, and the red light began to flicker, accompanied by the sound of "Dee." Even the other robots on the side are the same. Stark and Rod yelled bad when they saw this. This guy is going to blow himself up. Thinking of this, both of them flew out together. Stark went straight to Peppa, and Rod quickly found a place to hide. As for Nanjo, he was still standing there, looking at Venki, who was already a little puzzled in his eyes. At the last moment of his life, Venki still didn't understand why this person didn't even hide in the face of the explosion. Along with the explosion of huge amounts of in the sky full of fire, Ivan Venki exploded. Similarly, there are other human robots that exploded. There is panic everywhere, and disaster has happened again in New York. Nanjo was standing in the center of the explosion and was hit by the explosion of shockwave, but he was still unscathed. Even the clothes on his body are not damaged in any way. I have to say that Stark's technology is still strong. Nanjo praised Stark, but before the voice fell, the voice of the system rang. Ding! Congratulations to the host for achieving the event achievement, Iron Man vs. Whiplash event. The host gets a 3% inheritance bonus. This time Nanjo succeeded, and he won the second event reward. For this few percent of the reward, he was cautious. With his joy, Nanjo also raised his head and flew to his home. I already know how to fly now, which is extremely convenient for him, and he can save a lot of money on air tickets. Soon, Nanjo came downstairs to his home. When he first arrived here, he suddenly felt a force, a familiar force, but Nanjo couldn't figure out who this force belonged to. Thinking about it, Nanjo speeded up his steps upstairs, took out the key and opened the door. Entering the living room, Nanjo saw Hila watching the sofa vigilantly. She was standing by the window, but she was always fighting, her eyes full of vigilance. When Nanjo looked on the sofa, he was also taken aback. Sitting on the sofa, it was Odin who had visited before. It turns out that this familiar force comes from Odin. The three children were also standing aside, and it was the first time they saw Hila so nervous. When Odin revealed that he was the father of Hila, the three children were not so repulsive. Instead, they talked very well with Odin. Seeing Nanjo came back, Odin smiled and stood up. Hello, Mr. Nanjo, we meet again. Odin. Nanjo squinted at the old man in front of him. At this time, he came to the front of the three children, led them into the house, and then sat on the sofa, and Odin naturally sat on the small sofa on the side. What are you doing here? Is it possible to take Hila away? Hearing Nanjo's question, Odin smiled faintly, then shook his head. Naturally, it's not the problem. I'm here, there are other things. Upon hearing this, Nanjo understood instantly. This Odin is not only a good king, but definitely also a good father. But this good father is definitely not suitable for Hila. You don't want me to take care of your son, do you? As soon as Nanjo said this, Odin was taken aback, and Hila behind Nanjo was also taken aback. How are you? Soon, there was a trace of fear on Odin's face. You want to ask how did I know? Before Odin could finish speaking, Nanjo interrupted him. I know many things, so don't be too surprised. Nanjo naturally knew what happened in New Mexico. Thor was exiled here, along with his hammer. Nanjo couldn't be more clear about this, and he was leaving for that place tomorrow. Since Mr. Nanjo already knows, then I don't need to say more. I hope Mr. Nanjo can secretly protect my son Thor. Yes, it's okay, after all, I really want to go to New Mexico. As Nanjo said, he touched his chin, and then set his eyes on Odin's body. Is that paid? Naturally, Nanjo will not do it for nothing, and he will always be paid. As long as the money is appropriate, Nanjo will naturally accept it. Definitely, Nanjo's words were also within Odin's expectation. He had already guessed that this person would be paid. As long as you help me, you can become Asgard's most honored guest, and I will never have any trouble with Hela before I pass away. If Odin was a compromise before, then this time, Odin really said this from the heart. Even Hela was taken aback, she didn't expect Odin to be able to do this. It seems that you are very sincere. Nanjo said so from his lips, but he was actually scolding his mother in his heart. After all, Odin didn't have any sincerity in these words. Even if he didn't give himself these rewards, he would be a guest when he arrived at Asgard. He didn't dare to trouble Hela easily. But Nanjo still chose to accept the reward, although it seemed that the promise of the reward was useless. After all, there is still a big gap between active acceptance and forced compromise. What Nanjo wants is a righteous word. Good. Nanjo nodded. If this is the case, then I will help you, and I will help you take care of your ineffective son. Seeing Nanjo agreed, Odin was still very happy, but from Nanjo's mouth that his son was not a good tool, he always felt very uncomfortable. In that case, I thank Mr. Nanjo. If there is nothing to do, I will leave first. As Odin said, he was about to turn around and leave Nanjo's home. Wait a moment. Suddenly, Nanjo stopped Odin. Odin turned his head, a little bit uncomprehending. He didn't understand why Nanjo wanted to stop him. If I lifted that hammer, would your son's self-esteem be frustrated? As soon as Nanjo said this, Odin was taken aback. He didn't expect Nanjo to ask this question. Anyone who is approved by the hammer can lift that hammer, so as long as it is approved by the hammer, you can also lift it. As for Thor's self-esteem frustration, I don't know, I don't think he will. After all, Odin left Nanjo's home. This time, Nanjo did not stop him. After Odin's breath disappeared, Hela sat down on the sofa, seemingly dejected. Nanjo can understand why Hela behaves like this. Although Hela hates Odin, how can I say that Odin is also his father? Seeing that his father, for Thor's safety, hesitate to return to this place where he suffered a lot and seek help from Nanjo. Look at Odin's attitude towards Thor, then look at yourself. Hela's heart was naturally lost. Nanjo at the moment came to Hela's side. I know your mood right now, it's very contradictory. Hela raised her head and glanced at Nanjo. She knew that Nanjo had just accepted Odin's condition for herself. After all, you need a famous teacher to fight a war. As long as Odin has promised, then Odin will never come to trouble himself. What Nanjo wants is this justification. And all this seems to be for oneself. Seeing Hela leaned her head on Nanjo's shoulder, Nanjo was a little surprised by this move. This is the goddess of death, now she looks like a weak woman. I also want to go to New Mexico with you. After a while, Hela spoke slowly. She wanted to see her younger brother, the younger brother whom Odin loved so much. Nanjo did not refuse Hela's request this time, but nodded slightly. Nanjo not only understands Hela's current mood, but the Godmaster can also understand him. All this seems to be related to his life in that world. Hela was also quite surprised. She didn't expect Nanjo to really agree to her. She wanted to ask why, but after thinking about it, she still didn't say it. If you want to go, just pack up. We have to spend a few days there. Things in New Mexico are not easy. After all, I have to participate as an S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, so I won't be so easy. Hela nodded, got up and walked to Nanjo's bedroom. Now Hela not only occupies Nanjo's room, but also occupies Nanjo's closet. Hela's clothes are all in Nanjo's closet. However, these clothes still used Nanjo's money. As for Nanjo's clothes, Nanjo didn't care about it. After all, he didn't have a few clothes originally. Nanjo came to the room where the three children were staying and explained to them. Sure enough, all three children made dissatisfied voices. Although Hila took them to Hawaii during the holiday, they still wanted to go out with Nanjo. But when I heard that Nanjo was the reason for work, the three children stopped making trouble. But when Wanda and Lorna heard that Hila was going to go, their eyes also revealed jealousy. After comforting the three children, Nanjo also came to the living room, lay on the sofa, and booked 2 plane tickets to New Mexico. In the report to Nick, Nanjo flew back from Texas to New York and then to New Mexico. So the itinerary makes sense. Just watch Nanjo put down his phone. Wait for dawn, you have to go to New Mexico to clean up the mess again. New Mexico. Nanjo and Hila got off the plane and came to this city. In fact, Nanjo hasn't been here much, and he's not particularly familiar with it. Nanjo. Just as the two walked out of the airport, Phil Coulson's voice came over. Nanjo followed the voice and looked over and found that Phil Coulson was beckoning to them. Nanjo didn't think much, and brought Hila to Phil Coulson. Seeing Nanjo also brought a person, Phil Coulson was a little puzzled, and when he saw Hela's appearance, he was immediately silly. Why are you still bringing people here? Phil Coulson pulled Nanjo aside. You are here to do the task. Why are you still bringing people here? This is you. Phil Coulson said, looking back at Hila. He was also surprised by her beauty. Is this your girlfriend? Nanjo shook his head quickly. It's just a friend, don't worry, it won't affect my work. After hearing Nanjo's words, Phil Coulson glanced at Hila again, and couldn't help but feel a little distressed for Hill. Okay, don't look at it, you may not even be able to beat him. Nanjo felt that Phil Coulson was about to be fascinated, and quickly patted him on the shoulder, bringing him back to reality. And Phil Coulson was surprised because of Nanjo's words. He didn't understand why Nanjo would say that he might not be able to beat that woman. No matter how you look at it, it's impossible for this person to beat himself. However, being dragged into the car by Nanjo Shung, Phil Coulson didn't think much, and sent the two to their residence. If you want to see your brother, just stay here and don't go around. When he arrived at the hotel, Nanjo gave Hila some advice. And Hila also nodded, indicating that he would accept Nanjo's amp. After getting a positive answer from Hila, Nanjo nodded in satisfaction, and then left the hotel with Phil Coulson. When did you and that girl meet? In the car, Phil Coulson asked Nanjo, who was sitting in his co-pilot. And the so-called girl in his mouth is Hila. When did you meet? Nanjo stroked his chin. About half a year ago. What happened? Phil Coulson shook his head and continued to ask, does she know your ability? When Nanjo heard this question from Phil Coulson, he hesitation. After a long while, Nanjo nodded slowly. He still didn't hide from Phil Coulson. Yes, my strength. Upon hearing this, Phil Coulson was stunned. No, do you trust her so much? Facing Phil Coulson's questioning, Nanjo just smiled and said nothing. He knew his strength, but Nanjo would never tell him Hela's true identity. After all, after the events in New Mexico are over, Phil Coulson will probably gradually know Hela's true identity, so Nanjo doesn't need to tell him now. Seeing that Nanjo didn't seem to tell him his plan, Phil Coulson didn't continue to ask questions but closed his mouth wisely. By the way, I didn't tell you important things. As soon as he closed his mouth, Phil Coulson realized that he had not shared work information with Nanjo. On a wasteland in New Mexico, something with a strange energy source fell down. This thing seems to be, a hammer. In fact, there is no need for Phil Coulson to share work information with Nanjo. Nanjo naturally knows what is happening here. Take me to the scene to see it. Phil Coulson was still talking, but was interrupted by Nanjo. Phil Coulson also nodded. He knew it was better to make Nanjo's live observation more reliable. In short time, the two arrived at the place where the hammer dropped. The people at the moment shield have surrounded all the surroundings, and no one is allowed to approach. As soon as he walked into this temporary workplace built by S.H.I.E.L.D., Nanjo saw a familiar person. Hawkeye, Clint, Barton agent. Hey, Boat, don't come here unharmed. Barton smiled and walked towards Nanjo, and Nanjo greeted him. Clint, I haven't seen you for a long time. The two also hugged each other and patted each other on the back. Nanjo and Barton Agent had a fateful friendship. When Nanjo was 17 years old, he and Barton went to Mexico to investigate a smuggling case, and accidentally discovered that the target of their investigation turned out to be a member of Hydra. The two were also discovered by Hydra. In addition, Hydra was deeply rooted in Mexico and communicated with many gangs, so the two were also hunted down all the way in Mexico. They supported each other and finally returned to Washington, thus establishing a very strong relationship. If Barton has the best relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D., Natasha Romanoff, then the second best is Nanjo. But after that, Barton and Nanjo didn't have many tasks to work together. Nanjo is mainly responsible for destroying Hydra, while Barton is mainly responsible for hostile forces in some countries. The two have not seen each other for a long time. This meeting was also unexpected, but the unexpected was limited to Barton. I didn't expect you to come too. Barton took Nanjo by the arm and walked inside. I didn't expect you to be there either. Nanjo echoed Barton's greetings. After a period of greetings, Nanjo also came to Phil Coulson's side again. The greeting is over, take me to see that hammer. After hearing Nanjo's words, Phil Coulson immediately led the way, and Nanjo came to the place where the hammer dropped. Nanjo looked at the S.H.I.E.L.D. staff who were testing around, then patted Phil Coulson on the shoulder. Help me spend all of them and turn off the camera. Phil Coulson was also taken aback when he heard this, but he still obeyed Nanjo's instructions, drove all the staff out, and turned off the camera. Now only Nanjo and Phil Coulson were left in front of the hammer. Nanjo held his hand on the handle of the hammer, and he felt countless strength in an instant. Mjolnir, the power is still very strong. Upon seeing this, Phil Coulson on the side thought Nanjo was going to raise his hammer, and quickly spoke. This hammer can't be pulled even if it's pulled with a cart. I know you are very powerful, but it's still hanging. Nanjo just smiled after listening. This hammer can be lifted not only by brute force. Lifting the hammer requires anything from this hammer. It's just that Nanjo wants to know whether he, an outsider who is not controlled by the laws of the universe, can also lift it. Thinking about it, Nanjo's hand holding the handle of the hammer was a force. Are you sure you want to? Phil Coulson was still talking, but for a moment he stopped speaking. Instead, he opened his mouth wide, unable to believe what was in front of him. Because Nanjo lifted this hammer that almost no one can shake with ease. You actually lifted it up. Phil Coulson looked at Nanjo with a look of disbelief, and he lifted the hammer that couldn't even be lifted by the truck like a toy. Surprised, Nanjo fiddled with the hammer in his hand, then put it back in place. Okay, nothing else, I just want to play with this hammer, so I let you go away other people. With that said, Nanjo was already walking out. When Phil Coulson saw this, he quickly followed up. Do you know what this hammer is? Where did it come from? Quote. Nanjo nodded. I naturally know, why? Do you want to hear? Phil Coulson also nodded quickly. He came here to investigate the hammer, so he naturally needs to know. Well, you come with me. Nanjo smiled slightly, beckoned, and motioned to Phil Coulson to follow him, and the two came to a corner of a temporary base. Then Nanjo slowly said about Asgard. From Nanjo's point of view, it is not a big deal to tell Phil Coulson about these things. After all, after this incident, Phil Coulson also has to know this fact. So he has to know if he knows it sooner or later, and it's no big deal to tell him now. What? Don't lie to me, that's a myth. Phil Coulson felt even more unbelievable after listening to Nanjo's words. Because the stories Nanjo tells are all myths I have read. Norse mythology, Odin, Thor. These can be found in textbooks on the earth. For a while, Phil Coulson still didn't want to accept it. But looking at Nanjo's eyes, he also had to choose to accept this fact. I didn't expect those myths to be real, which means that the hammer is actually Thor's, and he is now in New Mexico. Nanjo nodded when he heard this. It's practical. Thor is not so appropriate to describe Thor. Now he is actually the god of hammers. Without the hammer, he might be nothing. And maybe he will come by himself in 2 days, then you can see him. Nanjo's words made Phil Coulson stroke his chin. Indeed, his hammer is still here, he must take it away. Then according to what you said, the current hammer can only be lifted with the hammer's approval. You said he was exiled here. In other words, even if he comes, he can't lift the hammer. It's almost what it means. Nanjo replied. You just waited for the scene where Thor came here tomorrow, who was full of joy, raised the hammer with excitement, but found that the hammer could not be lifted at all, and then let you take it away with a frustrated expression. Upon hearing Nanjo's words, Phil Coulson couldn't help but smile. This scene is embarrassing just to think about it. If it really happened, it would be too much. Okay, it will rain tomorrow, so wait for a good show tonight. Nanjo patted Phil Coulson on the shoulder, and then left the base. Anyway, I have nothing to do with myself, so I might as well stay in the hotel. Looking at Nanjo's back, Phil Coulson immediately thought that there would be heavy rain the day after tomorrow. According to Nanjo, that Thor would arrive the next night. How much does he know? What is this? Does it predict the future? Phil Coulson at the moment was wandering around the base. The stories Nanjo told him made him feel incredible. He definitely felt even more incredible because Nanjo knew these things. He even knew that Thor would come tomorrow. Is it possible that Nanjo has become strong enough to predict the future? Plus, now that he can fly, is he still a human? This can be said to be God. Nanjo returned to the hotel room, and Hila immediately found him. How did you see my brother? Nanjo shook his head. I haven't seen it yet. I can see it in a little while. There will be heavy rain tomorrow. That night your brother will sneak into our base and pick up the hammer. Upon hearing this, Hila was a little puzzled. Tomorrow? Are you so sure? Just watch Nanjo grinning. Just rest assured, I can promise. Seeing that Nanjo was so confident, Hila was no longer talking, but the look in Nanjo's eyes was a little strange. But that hammer is not that difficult to pick up. I picked it up easily. Nanjo sat on the bed, took a sip of water, and said. After hearing Nanjo's words, Hila wasn't surprised. For those who are not controlled by the laws of the universe, it is still very simple to pick up this hammer. If you can't pick it up, that really surprises Hila. Thinking about it, Hila also gave a wry smile and looked at her palm. This hammer can only be lifted by someone recognized by the hammer. I don't have any qualifications now, right? With that said, Hila remembered that when he and Odin fought the 9 realms before, he was holding this Mjolnir in his hand. Thousands of years have passed, and things have long since been wrong. She dedicated everything she had to Asgard, and she followed Odin to fight everywhere when she was an adult. Abandoned his usual life, bathed in blood every day, and finally got this fate. Odin's expression of caring for his son really hurt Hela deeply. She had never felt the look in Odin's eyes. It seemed that in Odin's eyes, she was a tool used to kill. Thinking of this, Hela lowered her head and clenched her fists tightly. She wants to avenge the white-haired old man, she wants to return to Asgard, and let the person who had thrown herself off like a rag to see that she is the king of Asgard. It's just that these are just what Hela thinks now, and now she doesn't even have the ability to return to Asgard, let alone other things. And Nanjo naturally saw Hela's current situation and patted her on the shoulder without saying anything. Can I visit your base tomorrow? At this time, Hela spoke. When she said this, Nanjo understood very well. She wanted to see her younger brother earlier and see who was so doted by Odin. I'm afraid it won't work. Nanjo shook his head. You are not from S.H.I.E.L.D. Naturally, you cannot be allowed to enter our temporary base. We are all idlers free from entering, definitely unless you will be invisible. After hearing Nanjo's words, Hela sighed and said nothing. After all, she really wouldn't be invisible. Don't worry, you'll see him sooner or later, but he is going to fight your other brother in New Mexico. Hearing this, Hela gradually raised her head, frowning slightly. What's the meaning? Just watch Nanjo smile again. It's not interesting, you just have to watch a good show. Hey, that's my thing. A new day, New Mexico. The 3 Jane, who had just sent Thor off, were on their way to their laboratory, only to see a car pulling out the equipment in their laboratory. This stunned the 3 of Jane. And Jane reacted the fastest, and immediately ran to her laboratory with her legs open. In the laboratory, some people in black suits are moving various items out of the laboratory. What are you doing? Jane stepped forward immediately, trying to stop them, but a man came to her and blocked Jane's way. Hello, Miss Foster, I am the Nanjo agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Before Nanjo could finish speaking, Jane interrupted him. What are you doing? This is our scientific research material. With that said, Jane was going to bypass Nanjo and stop those who were holding her own laboratory equipment. Jane doesn't know who these people are, but Dr. Eric Shavig behind her knows exactly what department Nanjo is from. Seeing that, he immediately stepped forward and stopped Jane. Jane, trust me, leave it alone, this matter is much more serious than you think. But where can Jane at the moment hear Dr. Shavig's words? In her eyes, these devices are like her own life, and these people from S.H.I.E.L.D. are damaging their own lives. Thinking about it, Jane broke free of Shavig and continued to move forward. And this time Phil Coulson appeared beside Jane. Miss Foster, we are investigating a security threat and we need to requisition all your investigation reports. Stop joking, expropriation. Did you expropriate like this? Jane couldn't suppress the anger in her heart. Looking around the S.H.I.E.L.D. staff who had not stopped, the anger in her heart was even stronger. It turns out that expropriation is a bunch of people I don't even know. Without my knowledge, I brought a bunch of miscellaneous people into my laboratory and took my intellectual property home. You are violating my constitutional rights. In the face of Jane's threat, Phil Coulson didn't care about it. It was this kind of time that he handled the most, so he was naturally familiar with the road. At the moment, Nanjo has already boarded the car. Negotiating with others is Phil Coulson's professional skills. I don't want to be nosy, just wait for Phil Coulson to settle the matter. Time is short. Phil Coulson also got in the car. What, solved it? Seeing Phil Coulson's relaxed face, Nanjo asked jokingly. Don't look at who I am. I am professional in this matter. Phil Coulson smiled proudly. This kind of thing is really a piece of cake for him. Although Jane is still chattering, Phil Coulson doesn't care about it. This job will be a shame. As long as you have a smile on your face, no matter how full you are, you just have a smile on your face. You are right, Thor will come to our base tonight. Phil Coulson at the moment lowered his voice and asked Nanjo in his ear. Now he is skeptical about this matter, because looking at the sky now, it doesn't mean it is going to rain, so he doesn't think that the person will come. Don't worry, he will definitely come, maybe that person is on his way now. Seeing Nanjo showing such a confident expression, Phil Coulson stopped talking and chose to believe it. On the other side, in the laboratory that had just been ransacked, Jane sat on a swivel chair, looking at the empty laboratory, feeling extremely frustrated and extremely angry. Not only this research, but Jane's years of hard research have been taken away. S.H.I.E.L.D. was like a beast who had been hungry for a long time, and really didn't stay at all. Even the backup files, backup files, are not left. Looking at Jane at the moment, Dr. Shavig comforted. S.H.I.E.L.D. is eyeing this matter, it means that this matter is serious enough. What department are they? At this time, Daisy, who had been silent on the side, asked slowly. A scientist I know who is very accomplished in the field of gamma rays, after the appearance of S.H.I.E.L.D., was completely lost. After that, Shavig looked at Daisy. You can probably understand how terrible they are now. When Daisy heard this, she nodded, and then stopped talking. After a while, a voice came from the silent laboratory again, and it was Daisy who spoke. However, the person who stopped us in the first place seemed handsome. As soon as Daisy said this, both Shavig and Jane glanced over. In this scene, Daisy dared not speak, so she could only lower her head and shut her mouth weirdly. Back at the temporary base of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nanjo began to flip up Jane's investigation notes. I have to say that this Jane is really a genius, and if she is not entangled with Thor, she is likely to become a new top scientist. But this girl is more unlucky, entangled with Thor, and even fell in love with Thor. To be honest, from a human point of view, it is very difficult for her to investigate this way. Nanjo is not stingy with his compliments, and Jane's ability is indeed very strong. You said from a human perspective, which means that there are actually many things in this note that are incorrect, right? Phil Coulson has been sitting around and asked after hearing Nanjo's words. Is not this nonsensical? Nanjo gave Phil Coulson a white glance. It's like I don't talk to you about Asgard. Can you think that this thing has something to do with aliens? As soon as Nanjo said this, Phil Coulson didn't know how to answer it for a while. After all, the knowledge is limited, and it is very difficult to be able to investigate this way. As Nanjo said, he put his notebook aside, and turned to look at the requisitioned instruments. Not only the scientific theory, but even the hands-on ability Jane is also very strong, which has to make Nanjo feel admired. Time soon came to the evening. A gust of overcast wind blew by, which really made Phil Coulson feel it was going to rain. After all, the weather forecast didn't say it was going to rain. When will he come? Phil Coulson came to Nanjo's side at the moment Nanjo was sitting on a stool leisurely and playing PSP. I don't know the exact time. Just wait. Anyway, I will definitely come tonight. Nanjo still plays with the PSP in his hand. You just have to stare at whether there is a group of dark shadows sneaking in. After listening to Nanjo, Phil Coulson also walked out. When time is short, just listen to a thunderstorm. This voice made Nanjo turn off the PSP and slowly stood up, with the corners of his mouth rising slightly. The show has begun. The dark night, accompanied by thunder, soon rained down. In the rain, a dark figure broke into the temporary base of S.H.I.E.L.D. It seemed that because of this person's arrival, the hammer seemed to feel something, and it even sent out a strong magnetic field vibration. Even S.H.I.E.L.D's machines are not working anymore. And that group of shadows, unfortunately, was still discovered. The alarm bell is masterpiece. Although Thor has become immortal, he also relied on his 1,000 years of fighting experience to put down all the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that came up, and went straight to the hammer. At the moment, Hawkeye Barton had set up his bow and arrow, aiming at Thor who was running wild. Barton, stop attacking. Just when Barton was about to launch his bow and arrow, Phil Coulson's voice came from the communicator. This makes Barton a little strange, but he still put down the bow in his hand. Why? Seeing the man getting closer and closer to the hammer, Barton asked suspiciously. Don't worry, he won't take this thing with him. Phil Coulson didn't answer this question specifically, he just said casually. And Thor at the moment has also come to the hammer. Thor smiled slightly at the translucent hammer on his body being poured in the rain. Old friend, I'm back. With that said, Thor grasped the handle of the hammer and then lifted it forcefully. But it is a pity that the hammer has not moved at all. This made Thor a little unexpected. He used force again, but still the same. Thor didn't understand. Why didn't this hammer suddenly obey? But at this time, his father Odin's words flashed in his mind. The sentence that you cannot lift the hammer without the approval of the hammer. Suddenly, Thor fell into deep despair as if he had fallen into the abyss. He knew that he was no longer recognized by this hammer, so he couldn't lift the hammer at all. In an instant, Thor's mentality collapsed. He knelt on the ground and let the rain pour on him. It was no longer known whether it was rain or tears. Soon, the agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. surrounded him. This time, Thor did not choose to resist, but let these S.H.I.E.L.D. people push himself to the ground and handcuffed him. Now, his heart is as if dead. I didn't do it as I imagined. On the contrary, I still feel a little heartache. Phil Coulson and Nanjo at the moment looked at what happened in front of them, the former also expressed such emotion. Nanjo just shrugged, turned his head and left here. However, Jane, who was far outside the temporary base, saw that the commotion inside the base had subsided, but Thor did not come out of it, and suddenly she had a lot of secret thoughts in her heart. Obviously, Thor has been caught. In case these people caught themselves and were double killed, Jane quickly got up and left here to look for reinforcements. After Thor was controlled by S.H.I.E.L.D., the rain also stopped. In the temporary base, Thor was handcuffed and pressed on the stool in the simple room. It was Phil Coulson standing opposite him. The people you treat me are those well-trained professionals who are as simple as security guards in a play supermarket, do you know? This is very hurtful. Phil Coulson looked at Thor, who had no energy at the moment, and spoke. So, where are you from? You know, only people who have received professional training can beat my people. Chechnya, Afghanistan, or Syria. Obviously, Phil Coulson didn't come up and just opened the skylight to talk brightly. He didn't come up and said that I knew you were from Asgard and you were Thor. Those things Nanjo's life. As for myself, I just pretended not to know anything, and then asked some questions that Thor didn't understand at all. After all, he doesn't know where Afghanistan is. All this was Nanjo's arrangement. Although I don't know why, Nanjo asked him to do this. Phil Coulson had no choice but to accept it. So, Don't you answer. Looking at Thor, who didn't send a single glance, Phil Coulson continued acting. Or are you a mercenary? There are many organizations that will spend a lot of money to hire powerful mercenaries like you to deal with us. So, who are you? Thor remained silent. Phil Coulson looked at the time. He really didn't know what he was doing here. After all, he already knew Thor's true identity, so he knew that even if he said something, the man in front of him would not say anything. At this time, Phil Coulson's phone rang suddenly, which surprised Phil Coulson. He picked up the phone and realized that it was Nick. Phil Coulson immediately glanced at Thor. Don't run around. When the voice fell, he left the room. After leaving the room, Phil Coulson looked at Nan-jo. You arranged this too. Nan-jo just shrugged. If I can arrange for Nick to call you, then you really have to be more careful, maybe shield is in my hands. With these words, Phil Coulson understood that this was not what Nan-jo did, but Nick really had something to find himself. Does this guy predict that this will happen in the future? Phil Coulson's eyes were once again full of incredible. You get everyone away first, and I want to chat with him alone. Nan-jo looked at Phil Coulson, who was about to answer the phone, and said. Phil Coulson nodded, and then connected to the call from Nick, which had been ringing for a long time. But Nan-jo did not rush in at the moment, but stood quietly outside. He knew that there was another person in at the moment's room talking to Thor. He didn't want to go in and disturb the conversation between the two brothers, so he stood here quietly, waiting for the uninvited guest to leave. In the meantime, Phil Coulson has hung up the phone, sent out other people here, and assigned other tasks. There is a death knell here, no problem. Seeing that the other staff members were a little worried that the guy would run away, Phil Coulson decisively took out the identity of Nan-jo. This allowed the other staff to leave here with peace of mind. The staff gradually left here, leaving only two people. One is Nan-jo, and the other is sitting on the stool, instantly losing any energy, like Thor, whose soul has been drained. Upon seeing this, Nan-jo knew that the guy had already left, so he switched all the monitoring in the room and this place to looping, and then put on a mask and entered the room. Thor at the moment raised his eyes and looked at Nan-jo. He doesn't know why this person is wearing a mask, but now he is not in the mood to know. Thor. Nan-jo looked at Thor and smiled slightly and called out his name. This surprised Thor. He raised his head and looked at Nan-jo. He didn't know who this person was, but he could say his name. Why are you frowning? I guess, did you just die? What did you say? Nan-jo's words instantly ignited Thor, angrily wanting to break free of the handcuffs, and want to go up and punch the mask. This was provocative from Nan-jo's mouth, and Thor was naturally very angry. But now he has long lost his supernatural power, and it is difficult for a mortal body to shake the firm handcuffs. So after breaking free for a long time, he also broke free of loneliness. At the moment, Loki came to the place where Mjolnir was placed. At the moment, he is still in a state that no one can see at all. Seeing that he came to Mjolnir's side, grabbed the handle and pulled hard. The hammer didn't move at all. When Loki saw this, he used both hands vigorously, but the final result was the same, Mjolnir didn't move. Loki was obviously embarrassed, touched his wrist, turned and left. He is also not the one recognized by the hammer. At the moment, in Thor's room. Looking at the angry Thor, Nan-jo said quickly, "Wow, big guy, calm down." Then Nan-jo took another bench from outside and sat down opposite Thor. Looking at Thor, who was angry at the moment, Nan-jo continued to say, "If I'm right, the person who came just now was your brother, and said that the condition of the armistice with Jotunheim was to exile you permanently, and your mother wouldn't allow you to go back, right?" Nan-jo recounted what Loki had just said to Thor, the uninvited guest who appeared just now, invisible to ordinary people. With these words, Thor's anger gradually disappeared, replaced by vigilance. Who are you? Thor knows very well that Loki just now can never be seen by others, but the person in front of him can say all the things Loki said very accurately. In other words, this person knew that Loki had just arrived, and even knew all the records of the conversation between the two of them. I am not that important. Nan-jo still said the same. You should be desperate now. Your father died because of you, and you will never go back to the hometown where you grew up. And your divine power has also disappeared, so Mjolnir is also difficult for you to move. The throne is also completely out of play, and your reputation can only stay on this small earth in life. Isn't it desperate? Nanjo's slightly ridiculous tone made Thor very disgusted, but there was nothing wrong with what he said, so Thor did not get angry, but bowed his head and stopped speaking. My father was so angry that he died because of what he had done. He didn't need to think about it. He was definitely the most unfilial Asgard people in the ages. Without this throne, this supernatural power, I don't care, after all, I am the most asshole in Asgard. Thor doesn't care who this person is, anyway, it should be someone related to Asgard. I'm just worried about my mother, As Thor said, a tear was also drawn across the corner of his eye. Seeing this, Nanjo could hardly contain his smile. This Thor is really silly, and it can be said that the current Thor still trusts his brother too much. You don't seem to be on Earth, who are you? Thor looked at Nanjo in front of him and asked. It is naturally impossible for the Earthlings to hear the conversation between him and Loki just now, so in Thor's eyes, Nanjo is definitely not an Earthling. Unfortunately, I am indeed an Earthling. Nanjo smiled again, and I still have some friendship with your father. As soon as Nanjo's words were uttered, Thor's mood dropped again. Seeing Thor at the moment lacking energy, Nanjo stepped forward and patted him on the shoulder. You shouldn't be so sad, you have to believe, hope will always appear. Nanjo's remarks are no different from nonsense. You may not even be able to make chicken soup. However, Nanjo at the moment does not intend to tell Thor the truth, after all, this is not his own job. He came to Thor, naturally there were other things. At the moment, in an inconspicuous corner of Nanjo's clothes, a camera was facing Thor. And this camera is connected to Nanjo's mobile phone, and on the other side of the phone, Nanjo is making a video call with Hela. That is, all the communication between Nanjo and Thor just now was seen by Hela. And Nanjo came to Thor to chat, to a large extent, to make Hela take a look at his beloved brother. Stay well on the earth, as it is an atonement. Nanjo gave Thor a few words of feigned comfort, then left the room and resumed monitoring. Immediately afterwards, Phil Coulson returned with someone, and Thor was taken away by Dr. Shavig as a fake identity. Definitely, they have to be followed by an S.H.I.E.L.D. agent behind them. And Nanjo also returned to his hotel. How is it? See your brother? After seeing Hela, Nanjo asked. I saw it, it really looks a little silly. Hela was playing with her phone and responded casually. But it seems that Asgard is afraid of danger. Odin is not dead, he was alive and kicking before. Hela naturally didn't believe Loki's remarks that Odin was dead. After all, I only met him a few days ago, and he is in good spirits. So she also understood what kind of problem Asgard was facing now. So I told you to watch a good show. Nanjo sat down and took a drink. There will be a fight nearby in 2 days. I will show you the scene at that time. Hela raised her head and glanced at Nanjo when she heard this. Really, there is still a fake. Nanjo replied, I promised you to come before, did you forget? After getting Nanjo's affirmative reply, Hela smiled, then put down the phone and looked at Nanjo. Actually, I really want to see that younger brother. I am very interested in that younger brother. Listening to Hela, she didn't seem to be very interested in Thor, but she was very interested in the deceitful brother Loki. If you have time to go to Asgard, you will naturally have a chance to see it, but after a while, he will have to come to Earth again, so you can wait if you are not in a hurry. Nanjo's words once again puzzled Hela. This guy really seems to know everything. At that time, I won't restrict your activities like I do now. If I want to see that younger brother at that time, I will personally take you there. It's just that I can't recognize each other. Hela didn't understand when he said this. Why? She didn't understand. Since she can meet that younger brother, why can't she recognize that younger brother? But just as Nanjo made a silent gesture with his fingers. Don't tell the secret. Late at night, Hela day stay in the hotel already. She is not the kind of person to be able to live in the hotel, so the boat South clamor to take her out. South Africa there is no way, really failed to beat her, so she took away from the hotel, wandering the streets at night in New Mexico. On the bar to see it. Two is walking aimlessly, Hela also to the interest, one way or another boat going to the bar and walked south. What actually, I'm Joe Nan said that after all he has always been accompanied Hela out, so naturally accordance with the Hela. He came to the bar, dim lighting along with an alcohol taste that he could feel the open. Hila did it at the bar to hand a cup of your favorite wine. Do not drink in Boat South, so I ordered a glass of non-alcoholic drinks. This time, glanced to the side of the Boat South glance, suddenly shocked, then grinned. Dude, here I am. It is that drinking wine in a boat not far from the south, Thor and Shui Zhe. At the moment Shui Zhe and the bite enjoying long drink drunk, and spoke tongue stroke is not straight. Hey, look over there. South Hila boat patted on the shoulder, then nodding over there drinking Thor. See Thor, Hila is also a bit surprised. This is indeed a coincidence, I did not think they actually met here. At the moment of Thor has been talk of this being patted Shui Zhe bald account of the anti-do guy, I did not notice the two boat Hila south. How, you want to go with him going on nibbling? At the moment the boat south to see Hila, asked. But Hila is shook his head. Now it is not the time, and he does not know me, I want to be as a moron. Hila have made it very clear, and now Thor did not know themselves, if they rush forward, it is likely to be as big a fool. South heard this boat, also shrugged, not words. But South boat immediately realize one thing, agent since Thor here, it will be here on behalf of S.H.I.E.L.D. Because Phil Coulson when Thor ordered to go but some trace of Thor. Sure enough, little time, a man wearing a black suit and came to the south side of the boat. Sir, how do you hear? South boat back and looked, found himself still a little impression of this man, who is S.H.I.E.L.D. Really unlucky. South Joe Wei Joe brow, he also did not want it and S.H.I.E.L.D. of people have anything to do during the break, to quickly distance themselves from their own. The South saw a boat, or some accident of this agent, do also to track the boat south of Thor. Never mind, I just wanted to hecko wine, did not think this guy is here. South boat thanks to a hand worship, you find me too was an accident, I'm just a friend to play. Joe Nan said, pointing Hila his side. That agent to see Hila is surprised a moment, this allure beauty also could not help but let the agent swallowed. In fact, as early as the Hila has entered the bar, Hila had been a lot of people take notice. Here, there are many natural things against the law attempts to Hila line. You continue to you, do not bother me, but do not want me to help you. South boat, then let the agent smile or two. Joe Nan whole character S.H.I.E.L.D. who do not know, Nick to let him put a half fake people, this is a general myth exists in S.H.I.E.L.D. This is the name of a natural agent did not count on the South boat able to help themselves, after all, what boat South acting style we all know. Well, you come on slowly. Joe Nan said, as he patted the name of the agent. The agent is also very smart, knowing what Nanjo means, so he left if he was very witty. Soon after the agent left, a small fool in flowing clothes came to Nanjo. Hey, beauty, do you want to play with brother? The typical bullshit tone made Nanjo a bit funny. And Hila didn't even look at that fool, these people weren't enough to make her take it seriously. Seeing that Hila didn't take care of herself, the gangster would tell Nanjo to squeeze away. What's the point of staying here with you and this guy who doesn't even drink? While talking, the bully was about to push Nanjo away from the chair. But unexpectedly, Nanjo suddenly stretched out his hand and directly grasped the thug's wrist. Immediately afterwards, the fool felt a pain from his wrist. He looked back at Nanjo, only to find that Nanjo was smiling and looking straight at himself. The fool immediately felt that this person was difficult to deal with, and quickly broke free of Nanjo's hand. When Nanjo arrived, he didn't really want to break his wrist, so he naturally let go of him and let this person leave. Should we take a gamble? At this moment, Hila spoke suddenly. How about we bet this person will just let it go? Nanjo smiled when he heard this. I bet he won't let it go. Hila also smiled slightly, coincidentally, I don't think he will either. When the voice fell, Nanjo tilted his head. Or, solve the problem. Hila did not reply, but stood up directly, her actions had already expressed her thoughts to Nanjo. Then, Hila and Nanjo left the bar one after another. And just as they left, the little fool who had harassed Hila just got up and left the bar with 5 or 6 people. At the moment there are few people in the night in New Mexico, and the streets are now perilous. Crisis is not only used to describe New Mexico, the relatively poor places in the United States, the night is full of crisis. Sure enough, Nanjo and Hela were stopped when they received injuries without pedestrians. And the leader is the little fool just now. I knew I was in trouble, so I ran away. The gangster looked at Nanjo mockingly. This is my place. Even if you are a policeman, only the two of you are just lambs to be slaughtered. The little fool said, looking at Hela. Don't worry, sister, we won't hurt you, we will take good care of you. Before the words were over, the other small gangsters just let out wretched laughter. Did you hear that? They want to cherish you. Nanjo turned his head and looked at Hela, and found that Hela's face was ugly at the moment. If he doesn't kill him for a while, can he abandon him somewhere? Hela's words revealed fierceness, and Nanjo couldn't help but smile when he saw this expression. Definitely, you can destroy him wherever you like. The gangster saw Nanjo and Hela groaning unexpectedly, and immediately felt that they were greatly insulted. You, the bully roared, neither of you can run away today. The roar of the bully seemed to Nanjo to be incompetent anger. After all, in his opinion, this bullshit is not as good as the ants. Gunshots rang out on the streets of New Mexico, alarming Thor in the bar. He dragged the already drunk Schweg out of the bar, and he saw Nanjo and Hela standing not far away, while 5 or 6 gangsters were lying on the side. Hey, what are you doing? Thor slowly stepped forward. He didn't know what happened, but instinctively thought that Nanjo and Hela had a gun and knocked down each other. We just protect ourselves. Nanjo looked at Thor coming, and pointed to the fool who had already put on the mask of pain on the ground. The thigh of this fool has been pierced by a bullet. It definitely wasn't Nanjo who shot but he shot himself. But as for why the gangster was shot, the gangster himself can't believe it. The fool was very angry because Hela and Nanjo didn't pay much attention to it, and the few people they brought with him took out a knife and ran towards Nanjo. But what kind of damage can a knife like this cause Nanjo and Hela? All 6 knives were broken by Nanjo and Hela. This is not a hand-to-hand trick of taking a hand in hand, it's just holding a stabbed knife roughly. The knife made a metal collision sound like it was stabbed on a steel plate. The emergency, the knife was breaking off pieces of the boat south. At this time, the bully still couldn't react, he still didn't understand how Nanjo broke the knife. But when he had reacted, the people he was carrying had all fallen to the ground, his chest was sunken, and the corners of his mouth were bleeding. Only then did the elf fool really panic, and he realized that he might have gotten involved with someone who should never be offended. He began to beg for mercy, but it was obvious that Nanjo would not let him go easily. In the end, the bully suddenly drew his gun from his waist and shot Nanjo out. I thought that this gun would kill Nanjo, but I never thought that the bullet would stop in front of Nanjo's nose. Nanjo, who has mind control, wants to control a bullet very easily. Immediately after seeing Nanjo waved his hand, the bullet hit the thug's leg. They are demons. The bullshit's voice was full of fear, looking at Thor, pointing towards Nanjo and Hela. The two of them are demons, save me. In his opinion, it is not human at all that it can control bullets without being stabbed by a knife. Then came the smell of urine as because of pain and fear let this bum direct urine. Really weak. Hela was full of disgust. Thor at the moment looked at Nanjo and Hela, and when he saw Hela he was taken aback. Hela gave him a very kind feeling, and he couldn't tell why. Babble, trouble dead. Hela looked at this arrogant fool who hadn't been as arrogant as before, and became even more disgusted. Let you be disrespectful to me, and want to cherish me. I make you no way to cherish others in this life. Hela said, walking forward directly, and stepping on the fool's lower body with a foot on the fool's lower body. Oh, when Nanjo and Thor saw this scene, they all instantly put on masks of pain. Although the foot did not step on his body, the pain was also a pain in the heart of the two of them. As for the little hapless guy, he passed out long ago after being stepped on, and he didn't even scream. You trampled his egg to pieces. Thor looked at Hela incredulously. How cruel this beautiful woman who seemed to be overwhelmed with her country was so cruel when she started. It's only cheaper to step on his eggs, and he is lucky that he has saved his life. Hela didn't even look at Thor, turning her head to leave. Even Nanjo couldn't bear to look at this tragic situation. A man, if there is no proof that he is a male thing, that live, what is the point? Nanjo's words were approved by Thor, and he also nodded, affirming Nanjo's words. And Nanjo also followed Hela to leave here, leaving Thor with a little reaction. It's too scary to smash the egg. Thor suddenly felt that the woman wasn't that kind anymore, and was rather afraid. It turns out that there are so many ruthless people on the earth. Thor murmured, and then left with Shavig. You are too cruel, you actually trampled on someone's egg. Did you do this before? Nanjo came to Hela's side, and her behavior just now stunned Nanjo. Although Nanjo would also use some methods of attacking his lower body when performing tasks, Nanjo had never done so before destroying the lower body in this way. Who makes him speak bad words? This is what he deserves. Hela didn't think there was anything, on the contrary, he felt that it was very kind without letting him die. You didn't do the same before, did you? Nanjo looked at Hela at the moment, and suddenly remembered that Hela used to say that he would be harassed. Nanjo just asked her not to hurt her opponent's life, and she could do whatever she wanted. But now it seems that Hela often uses this method. Sure enough, Hela buckled her finger and said calmly. Occasionally. Occasionally. Nanjo smiled bitterly. This sentence can be seen occasionally. Hela did not do things like this less. I'll call you the egg breaker from now on. Nanjo said jokingly, but what he got was a big roll of Hela's eyes. At the same time, the several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents following Thor, they also reacted from shock every day. These people also saw Hela's actions just now. They actually knew that Nanjo and Hela were stopped by the gangsters. But they felt that with Nanjo's terrifying strength, these people were not opponents at all, and they would be wiped out easily. And when they heard the gunshots, they were a little nervous. They were worried that this was a gunshot by a gangster, and if there was anything wrong with Nanjo, they would have to blame themselves for a lifetime. Fortunately, nothing happened to Nanjo, but the fool was injured. Then they saw that the little hapless guy was stomped by Hela. Just look at the guys like Nanjo and Thor who have seen big winds and waves, let alone people like them. The female companion of Nanjo is terrifying. One of the agents at the moment said. This strength is certainly quite large, is not a simple person it will not be a new S.H.I.E.L.D. agent As agents, these people naturally imagine Hela as a similar person. It's hard to say, maybe it's the offspring of a fighting master. The agent on the other side said, this kind of person is still very suitable for Nanjo. Several people nodded, and they secretly gave themselves a taboo. If you can see after the woman, that they must not provoke. This woman is extremely cruel. When the time came to the next day, Phil Coulson and a group of S.H.I.E.L.D. staff were investigating the stamp similar to words that appeared on the ground when Thor came to Earth. After Nanjo talked to Thor, he said nothing to himself. When he asked, he said that he didn't know at all in the future. And Nanjo didn't tell him the meaning of the words. The reason was very simple, because Nanjo didn't know either. This makes Phil Coulson a bit of a headache. But these words should be known to Hela, but she did not see them either. Contact a linguistic expert. Phil Coulson at the moment squatted on the ground. Naturally he couldn't see the meaning of the words, so he looked directly at the people next to him and spoke. And the man had just returned to the car, and the sky was covered with dark clouds. Immediately afterwards, a colorful light appeared in the dark clouds, and then the beam of light directly hit the ground. In the beam of light, a huge amounts of steel giant came out. The S.H.I.E.L.D. staff on the side was also at a loss when seeing the steel giant. Sir, is this made by Stark? Obviously, such a steel thing will naturally be associated with Stark. He didn't tell me about this. Phil Coulson replied. Phil Coulson's meaning is obvious, this is not made by Stark. At the same time, in a hotel, Nanjo and Hela also saw the scene of the steel giant landing. Is it Asgard's again? Hela already felt a breath from Asgard. This thing should belong to your father. Nanjo ate a sandwich at the moment and said. Something that belongs to Odin. Hela was puzzled. But Nanjo nodded. This thing is the destroyer mecha. Hela was stunned when he heard this. Mecha destroyer? Are you kidding me? In Hela's cognition, the destroyer mecha is Odin's armor, with huge amounts of power. Now that he has come to this place, I am afraid that this street will hardly be intact. Definitely no joking, your other good brother tried his best to kill the good brother here. Nanjo said, just turned around to leave the room. And Hela also followed, still whispering in her mouth. What is their hatred or resentment? At this time, Nanjo turned around and looked at Hela. Your good brother who is still in Asgard, but Jotunheim's giants of Jotunheim, to be precise the son of their king Lof. What? Hela was shocked by the news. That person is giants of Jotunheim. Nanjo nodded. Odin took him out of Jotunheim's temple during the war with Lof. At that time, Odin was already so kind. If Hela didn't return to Nanjo this time, she lowered her head, as if thinking about something. Nanjo didn't know whether Hela participated in that war. If you participate, it means that Odin brought Loki back from Jotunheim, no one else knows except for himself and his wife. When time was short, Hela raised her head again, as if she didn't care about this at all, walked past Nanjo and left the room. Upon seeing this, Nanjo gave a wry smile. She was following her just now, but now she is following her. At this time, Phil Coulson had already picked up the horn and looked at the destroyer mecha that was slowly approaching. You are using unregistered weapons and equipment, please identify yourself. Phil Coulson's voice fell, and the destroyer mecha really stopped. This made Phil Coulson also a long sigh of relief. It seems that this big guy is not the enemy. The mask on the head of the destroyer mecha also slowly opened. But there is nothing inside. The agent's intuition makes Phil Coulson feel that the situation is not good. Immediately afterwards, under the empty helmet, a red light rose unexpectedly, and then a fiery red laser shot out. Hurry up! Upon seeing this, Phil Coulson immediately asked his men to leave, and the destroyer mecha directly melted a car. At this time, Phil Coulson quickly dialed Nanjo's number. Hello, Nanjo. As soon as the call was connected, Phil Coulson just said 5 words and was immediately interrupted by Nanjo. I know what happened, I'm rushing over. After hearing Nanjo's words, Phil Coulson was also relieved a lot. With Nanjo, they have great hope. At the moment, the destroyer mecha didn't seem to be killing these shield people. It turned around and walked to the side of the street. On this street, Thor, Sif and the 3 warriors really stood in the middle of the street. They have evacuated the crowd, waiting for the arrival of the Doomsday mecha. Because of the arrival of the 4 of Sif, Thor at the moment already knew that his father, Odin, was not anxious to death because of him. All of this was Loki's conspiracy. At the moment, Thor's eyes were full of anger at Loki. Knowing that his father Odin hadn't died yet, Thor had already guessed some of Loki's conspiracy. But now he was still immortal, he didn't even have supernatural power, let alone raised a hammer. So their first task now is to solve the day of destruction that is getting closer and closer, and has even begun to destroy. But this is Odin's former armor. If you want to defeat this guy, Sif and the 3 warriors have no chance of winning, let alone Thor, who has become immortal. Nanjo and Hela had already arrived on the roof on the side of the street at this time. Watching the Doomsday mecha getting closer, Hela frowned. With her current strength, she also doesn't know if she can defeat this remotely controlled Doomsday mech. I should not be able to beat him now. Hela spoke at this moment. I can win as long as I can. Nanjo had a relaxed expression. If he could, he didn't have to take action at all, just because he was worried that the existence that had brought him into the dream twice would come out and make trouble again. At that time, Nanjo had to stand up. Nanjo just wanted to watch from a distance, and then achieve event achievements to get new inheritance points. He hoped that exists naturally be able to mind your own business. Destroy the sun mech at the moment, it has been slow to enter, and all the houses along the way have not been spared. Fortunately, the crowd had been dispersed by Thor and others. Except for property damage, there was no other loss, and no casualties were caused. When will you do it? Hela asked at this time. Obviously, in her opinion, Thor's 5 people simply don't have any strength to defeat this guy. Don't worry, Nanjo still looked relaxed. Just watch him smile slightly. When the time comes, I will naturally be on the court. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.